Hanging around after last orders, still so far from home.
There. It's almost March by the time you're seeing this. For me right now, it's about mid-February. And I got to say March is quite an interesting month. So we definitely have quite a lot to talk about today. And for this month, I've decided to put all of the rising sign horoscopes together in one video just to try out something different. Don't worry, the timestamps are for you down below so you can navigate to your zodiac sign. Before we get into March, I wanted to announce the free reading giveaway winner. So congrats to Sherry. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Congrats, you have won the free reading giveaway, and I enjoyed so much reading all of your comments. And stay tuned. I plan to do more giveaways such as this one, so hopefully you will get to win another one soon. So the reason that March is quite interesting is because we have Venus going retrograde basically on March 1st. And March is also eclipse season. So yes, it might not feel like it. It might feel like, wow, we just started 2025, but we are already there. We are already in eclipse season, the first eclipse season of 2025. And what we see throughout March is that the sun in the end of February entered the sign of Pisces. And now in March, it ends up basically making aspects as it travels through Pisces. It makes aspects to, I think, almost all of the planets, some more challenging, some a little bit easier. But basically, it whizzes by through Pisces. Later in the second half, enters Aries, and because of that, it makes a lot of aspects. So therefore, because of the fast movement of the sun and all of the aspects it's making, March might also feel a bit of like a roller coaster. You're feeling fine for 2 days, and then all of a sudden something else comes up. So definitely, we can have a lot happening. And then finally, as if that wasn't enough, we also have Neptune entering Aries at the end of March. And this is really exciting. Neptune is going to stay in Aries for a really, really, really long time. So it's definitely starting a brand new chapter for all of us, and we'll get into more details as to what this means personally for you in a second. So that's in general an overview of March. Let's jump in and talk about each of the rising signs so that you can know a little bit more what to expect. All right, let's start off with Aries. And Aries, as I shared in the general overview, we start off March with Venus going retrograde. So we start off a bit on not so nice. It's not a nice start. And right after Venus goes retrograde, literally the day after, on March 2nd, we also have the sun squaring Jupiter. So these two put together right at the beginning of March might feel like, not the best way to start the month. For you, Aries, Venus is going retrograde in your first house. So we definitely see you being one of the zodiac signs that might feel this retrograde in one of the strongest ways. And you might specifically be finding it very difficult from March 1st onwards to step into leadership positions and to really step into this persona and into your own shoes. You might feel a disconnect between the way you show up. You might feel like, wait, but why do I act like that? Why do I say that? Why do I dress like that? And it might feel like just things are not aligned. So be very, very mindful March and into April up until Venus starts to go direct. And especially for you, Aries, because this retrograde is in your first house and we have that square between the sun and Jupiter, which can already show sort of overbearing egos, us thinking we're more powerful, we're more important than we actually are. be careful that you don't step into that energy as a way to overcompensate for some of the struggles you might be feeling with your personality at this time. All right, so as we shared also in the general forecast, the sun is traveling through Pisces. It's going to make aspects with a lot of different planets during March. And for you, the sun is transiting your 12th house. So you might find that March is especially a period where there's a lot going on internally. You might find yourself needing to spend alone time so that you can work through all of the things that are coming up. What might be interesting for you too, Aries, is to maybe keep a dream journal at this time. Because the sun is in your 12th house, also the eclipses are going to be in your 12th house as well. There might be a lot happening in your dream life that could be giving you some clues, giving you some ideas as to what you need to pay attention to during this time. So as we move through the month, the first aspect that the sun makes is a trine to Mars in your 4th house. The trine with Sun and Mars might help us feel a boost of power, a boost of confidence to set boundaries, to express ourselves, to fight any wars that we might have going on. And this is especially a nice aspect because remember we had Mars going retrograde for a while. So it might feel like maybe some of the boundaries that you have failed to set with your family beforehand, this could be the beginning of March, could be a really nice time to maybe try that out. Some of the things that you're letting slide in January and February when Mars was retrograde, see if you can implement some of those boundaries around March 8th. Then after the sun makes that trine with Mars, it moves further into Pisces, further in your 12th house, and it conjuncts Saturn. This happens on March 12th, and what you might find when Saturn usually conjuncts the sun, we can feel like there is something blocking us in our actions, something blocking us in our mission, maybe something even sort of depressing us in our energy, in our energy for life, in our passion for life. And thankfully, the sun moves quite fast. So probably, like I said, all of these actions in March or all of these feelings in March will probably be like come and go. So that's one good thing about this conjunction. But do keep in mind around the 12th, a couple of days before, it might especially feel like there is some restriction. And especially for you, because this is in your 12th house, Aries, maybe there's some restrictions in you spending time alone. Maybe your work or your partnerships or your family is really asking for your time. Maybe you're finding it difficult to keep in pace with your spiritual practice as well. So keep that in mind. It's temporary and it will lighten up. Then just literally the 2 days after it it conjuncts Saturn, we have our eclipse. We have the sun and the moon opposing each other, which means it's a full moon or a lunar eclipse. And what's very interesting about this lunar eclipse is that we also have the sun sextiling Uranus. The eclipses usually bring faded endings or beginnings because this is a lunar eclipse or a full moon. We're talking about coming to terms with endings. So you might find, Aries, because this is on your axis of 12 and 6, you might find that themes of your service, themes of your health, your body, themes of your day-to-day routine, themes of your spiritual routine coming up. And there might be certain routines that are dying, certain routines that are that just end up stopping. It's not out of your own will, but they just no longer can happen. No, they're no longer a thing for you. And you are sort of forced to do things a little bit differently. You're forced to adapt a different routine. You're forced to define spirituality in a different way. But keep in mind that the eclipses are always for our own good. It's this idea of you stay at a job because it feels so comfortable, but one day you get fired, and 5 years later you look back to that period and you think, wow, I am so happy that that happened to me because it changed my life for the better. And if that didn't happen, if you didn't get fired, you would still be in that same job, not being happy, not living your life. That's the sort of energy with the eclipses. There might be something happening that feels difficult, but just know that in the long run, it's pushing you in a direction that's really good for you. So all of that being said, I wanted to also let you know that I'm opening up my books for eclipse readings. I'm opening up 5 spots for 30-minute long readings. We'll go into personal detail about this eclipse season and what it will mean for you. And these are at a discounted price as well. So since there are only 5 spots available, make sure you grab one quickly. I've left a link for you down below. Then, after this eclipse, the sun is basically at the final degrees of Pisces, or your 12th house. At those final degrees, it conjuncts Neptune, literally a day after it enters Aries, or your first house. And right as it does that, Venus, remember, who is retrograding, is also at the beginning of degrees of Aries, and they end up conjuncting. So this period from March 20th to March 22nd, we see quite a bit happening. So the conjunction with Neptune, the sun entering your first house, and the sun conjuncting Venus. Again, with this conjunction with Neptune in Pisces in your 12th house, I would really strongly advise you to pay attention to your dreams, to maybe carve out meditation time for yourself and really pay attention to what's coming up. Or pay attention even to the coincidences that are coming up. It's this idea of always seeing the Egyptian pyramids somewhere. All of a sudden your friend talks about it, then the book you're reading refers to them, then you put the TV on and there's a commercial about the Egyptian pyramids. Pay attention to those little clues, especially around March 20th when the sun conjuncts Neptune. And then during this period, I do think that you will start to feel more rejuvenated and more energized because the sun will enter your first house. So if you've been feeling a little bit more slow, a little bit more withdrawn in the last month, when the sun enters your first house, you should feel a little bit more upbeat. And let's talk a little bit further about that sun conjunction Venus once the sun does enter your first house. And this conjunction happens around March 23rd. I do think that March 23rd might be one of the first moments we have during this Venus retrograde that we feel like, okay, maybe things are becoming more clear. Maybe I'm getting little inklings of how I can be more aligned with my values, how I can change my personality so that it feels like it's more aligned to who I am. And I think because, the sun represents our ego, it's conjunct that retrograde Venus, which is very much drawn within right now. It's very much on reflection. And again, this is in your first house, Aries. I think this moment around March 23rd, you might have some revelations coming about, little inklings of answers or little inklings of what's not working, what clearly needs to leave or stop. So pay attention during this time. What I also love about this Sun-Venus conjunction is that at the same time, that conjunction sextiles Pluto. With the sextile in Pluto, we see that in order for you to align your personality with your values, align and show up in a way that's more aligned with who you are, you need to face what you're scared of. You need to face your fears. Pluto is in your 11th house right now, so some of those fears might be surrounding your future. Some of those fears might be surrounding the communities you belong to. An idea of how this could manifest, you need to face the fears that maybe some future goal you had about moving to Mexico, moving to Canada is not going to come true. You might be scared to come to terms with that, to realize that. But when you implement that, when you come to terms with it, when you face that fear of your dream not coming true anymore, we do see that you are probably able to focus a lot more, like we said, on how you show up in the day-to-day, to align it a lot more and say, okay, this future goal has been shaping me and who I want to be for so long. And now that I've faced the fear that it's not going to happen, you can get more to the core essence of, who are you without that goal or that dream? Then we close off the month on March 27th and March 30th with basically Venus and Neptune swapping. We have Venus who retrogrades so far back, it enters Pisces. Remember, Neptune is right at that end degree of Pisces, so they conjunct together. And then literally a day or two later, Neptune enters Aries. So they sort of swap positions. Neptune will be in your first house for 13 years, Aries. And this signals the next 13 years of you getting in touch with the spiritual side of you and really implementing that to your core. Really letting that become a part of your personality. And you might not, maybe, this is a guess, you might not consider yourself quite spiritual right now, Aries, or you might think, it's a part of me, but it's not the only part of me. Then for the next 13 years with Neptune in your first house, I do think this will be a really big focus. Spirituality can be defined in many different ways, but you might just be thinking in general, zooming out, reflecting on what is the point of all of this, beyond just going to work and coming home and having fun. So that might start that 13-year cycle. And I think it's beautiful for you, Aries, that we have, at the same time that Neptune enters your first house, asks you to incorporate the spiritual parts of you into your personality. We also have the Venus retrograde entering back into your 12th house, which is asking you to look at your spiritual values. Are your spiritual values still aligned? And, this could look in many different ways. But, for example, maybe before what you really valued in a spiritual routine was quiet time. And now you start to realize that actually what you value in a spiritual routine right now is connection or love. We see a little bit of that Venus retrograding back into your 12th house, asking you to also reconsider, what does spirituality mean to you? And I think that's so wonderful that Venus is doing that for us at the start of this 13-year cycle of Neptune in Aries. And then, of course, we cannot forget the second eclipse in March. It happens at the end of the month on March 29th. This one is a solar eclipse, which means that it's a new moon. And we will have both the sun and the moon in Aries in your first house. What I love about this new moon, about this solar eclipse, is that the sun and the moon, or that new moon, happens at almost the same degrees that Venus went retrograde. This is a really beautiful omen. It shows to me that this solar eclipse might again bring up some clarity around the Venusian retrograde themes that are coming up for you. It's an eclipse, so faded, and it's a new moon, beginnings. So you might find that there are some faded new beginnings when it comes to your personality and how you show up in the world. The idea that all of a sudden something changes in your routine, something changes in your circumstances, and you can no longer identify as I can't think of anything right now. You can't no longer identify with your job, or you can no longer identify with, well, I'm shy. It's this idea that you get a job that all of a sudden requires you to be on a national television. And it's this, you're forced into this new identity where you're like, I cannot be shy anymore. You're forced to move beyond and step into this new identity. And I do have a feeling for you, Aries. It might also be, again, about bringing this more spiritual side into your life. All right, let's talk Taurus about your March 2025 horoscope. As I shared in the general overview, we do start the month off with that Venus retrograde on March 1st. And it's in general not a nice start because the day after we also have the Sun squaring Jupiter. Venus is going retrograde in your 12th house. So what you might find with this Venus retrograde is that you're really reevaluating your spiritual values. What does spirituality mean for you? How does that look like? Are you somebody that says you value spirituality or you are spiritual, but you never actually do anything about it, or you never actually do spend time in meditation or journaling or helping others, volunteering, for example? Venus going retrograde in your 12th house, you might find that you especially need to spend time alone. Already with Venus going retrograde, it's more withdrawn energy, and the 12th house is already the house of spending alone time. And I do think it could benefit you during this Venus retrograde. It might be during those alone times that you find certain answers coming up and you're getting some needed clarity. And because we have the Sun square Jupiter aspect at the same time, pretty much, you might find that what this Venus retrograde is bringing up in regards to your spiritual values might rub your ego the wrong way. You might find that there's an ego part in all of us. You might find that the ego part of you struggles with it a bit and says, well, of course I don't have time to meditate. Like, how am I supposed to do that with all my responsibilities and my work and this and this and this? So be very mindful during this time that your ego is not taking over the story and not allowing you to be humble enough and to really look at yourself and your actions clearly. So for this first half of March, the Sun is in your 11th house. It's in this 11th house that it makes contacts, aspects with a lot of different planets. So most likely you will see these 11th house themes be quite central for you in March. You might be thinking a lot about your future term goals, your future plans, things like getting in long-term relationships, moving somewhere, maybe changing your career or thinking long-term vision with your career, moving, these like really big goals. Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years from now? And you might also find that other themes that are coming up in March are themes surrounding the communities that you belong to. And are they aligned to these future goals? I think there's a saying like, we become like the 5 people that we spend the most of the time with. So this is really top of mind for you in March, Taurus. You're really thinking about, how are the people I'm hanging out with helping me or deterring me from these goals that I have? And the first aspect, well, I should say the second, because the first one was the square with Jupiter. The second aspect that the Sun makes while it's traveling through your 11th house, it's on March 8th, and it's a trine with Mars. And I think this might be a beautiful time to set boundaries with these people, with this community, these friendship groups, to set that boundary during this time. Mars has been retrograde in your 3rd house for January and February. You might have felt like you couldn't express your anger, you couldn't express your boundaries as much during that time. And now that it's being supported, Mars is being supported by that trine with the Sun around March 8th, feel free to set those boundaries with those people, to especially set them in a verbal way to really tell somebody, okay, this works, this doesn't work. To maybe tell somebody that something needs to change in that relationship. A couple of days later, the sun keeps moving through your 11th house, and then on March 12th, it conjuncts Saturn. And during the general overview, I did describe that a lot of these aspects are with the sun, and the sun moves fast. So even though on March 8th, you would have been like, yeah, I'm feeling good, I'm setting boundaries, just like 4 days later, you're with that Saturn Sun conjunction, you might be feeling a little bit more down. You might feel like reality is blocking you from where you want to go. Again, this is a conjunction in your 11th house. You might feel like, okay, I'm going to cut ties with this person, but reality says, yeah, they're still your colleague. So that's not going to work. And you still need to pay your bills, so you can't just quit your job. Or you might feel like you have this goal of wanting to move to a warmer country, wanting to change your career. And then you realize reality sets in and says, yeah, you don't have enough money to move countries. Yeah, you don't have the time to start going to school again for this new career. So this might be a setback, a roadblock that's being put in your way around March 12th. Then a couple of days later, the sun's moving further in Pisces in your 11th house, and we have our first eclipse. So this is a lunar eclipse, which means it's a full moon. The sun and the moon are opposing each other in the sky. And this is happening again in your 11th. The sun is in your 11th, and the moon is in your 5th house. With eclipses, we're talking about faded beginnings or endings. This is a full moon or a lunar eclipse, so we are talking about faded endings. Again, this is impacting your 11th and 5th house, so there might be certain things just that come up that force you in a different direction. And I know force sounds horrible to use here, but I really think of eclipses as where we've fallen asleep, where we're too scared or just too comfortable to make a change, even though we know we should. It's like our current situation is not that uncomfortable, so we haven't done anything to change it. Like, it sort of bothers us, but we can also sort of live with it. But because we're not making any changes, we're also not really living to our fullest potential. And when an eclipse comes in, it says enough. Right? Okay, enough. You need to get a new job. You lose your job. Things happen with relationship, with family. Of course, many things can happen around eclipses that really force you in a certain direction. And for you, Taurus, this faded ending would have an impact on your future goals, and it can have an impact on your friendships. Maybe in some way, I don't know, something goes wrong with something, and then all of a sudden, the group that you belong to says, yeah, sorry, we no longer have a spot available for you. Your paperwork went missing and we gave your spot away this time. You no longer belong to this group. You're no longer a friend. It's sort of this weird thing where you're like, okay, I definitely submitted my paperwork. So what happened? But all of a sudden there's an ending there. You're no longer associated with those people, those groups. And again, the same thing can happen with any goals that you might have as well. I will be opening my books, or I should say my books are open for eclipse season readings. There are only 5 spots available, and these are personalized readings. We have 30 minutes together to just talk about your personal time during the eclipses, what's coming up for you personally. We can go into a lot more detail, of course, in a one-on-one reading. These are available at a discounted price, and as I share, there's only 5 of them available, so make sure you snag one up down below in the link in the comments. In the later half of the month, so we're talking about March 20th to about March 23rd, we have the sun entering those final degrees of Aries. Neptune is right there, so the sun ends up conjuncting Neptune. Just 1 or 2 days later, it enters Aries. And as it does that, Venus is retrograded so far back that it's right there at those beginning degrees of Aries, and they conjunct. So this period of the 20th to the 23rd, it might be an intense period because of those conjunctions that the sun is making. On the 20th specifically, with that conjunction with Neptune, be careful that you're not being disillusioned in some way by communities or by friends, by people. Be very careful. Like, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And especially because the 11th house is quite relational, I do want you to be careful that other people are not deceiving you around this time. And especially because the sun is going to enter your 12th house when it enters Aries, we do see that there might be a need for you to withdraw a little bit from other people. Usually when the sun enters our 12th house, we might have a bit more of a need for alone time. We might have a bit more of a need to have quiet time as well. And especially for you when this happens, when the sun enters Aries around March 20th, 21st, it could be nice to start doing that. You might have already been doing it from the beginning of March, because remember, Venus is retrograde in your 12th house, so you might have slowly been stepping towards that, your alone time and quiet time, and it might be especially even more around mid-March. When the sun and Venus conjunct there on March 23rd, you might find that some answers, a little bit of clarity, a little bit of like a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of understanding comes through when it comes to those Venusian or Venus retrograde themes, like spiritual values. You might find around the 23rd that maybe it starts to become clear to you, okay, so that is what spirituality means to me. Okay, so that is definitely not important to me. Or, wow, this thing that I thought I was doing because it helped me connect to something greater, actually, I was only doing that because it made my ego feel good. Around the 23rd, there might be some glimmers of understanding. And what I love about this Sun and Venus conjunction is that it's sextiling Pluto, showing us that we need to face our fears in order to get that glimmer of hope, to get that flicker of understanding. Pluto is in your 10th house, so perhaps there are some fears about how the public perceives you, how others view you, what they think of you, who they think you are, the role you play. Are you afraid that if you change something about your spiritual values, that people are no longer going to regard you as highly as they used to? There can be some fears that need to be faced around this time. And then we end off the month with basically Venus and Neptune swapping position. So Neptune, who is at the end degrees of Aries, at the end degrees of Pisces, basically enters Aries. But before that, which happens on the 30th, before that on the 27th, it's actually Venus who first retrogrades back into Pisces, conjuncts Neptune right there, those final degrees of Pisces, and then finally Neptune enters Aries. So they do like a little swap. With Venus retrograding so far back that it enters Pisces or your 11th house, you might start to see that your reflection of what does spirituality mean to you? What are your spiritual values? Also now comes to touch upon your goals and comes to touch upon the friendships or communities that you belong to. It's this idea that perhaps part of your spiritual mission or part of the way you want to show up here is being of service to your community. Perhaps it's about realizing, hey, my spiritual values are changing, so that long-term goal I had no longer makes sense. That doesn't align anymore. You might see that Venus retrograde shifting a little bit and bringing in more themes into it. And then on the 30th, when Neptune does that switch, when Neptune enters Aries, you will be starting a 13-year period, Taurus. A 13-year period of Neptune in your 12th house. Neptune in the 12th house is very emphasized. This is, we're talking about the 12th house, which is already a Neptunian house. Neptune entering there definitely is amplified. We see a great theme for you for the next 13 years of getting in touch with your spirituality and really understanding what does it mean to you, and really understanding that material things are not permanent. Material things are almost even a distraction. And you might find yourself for the next 13 years starting to chip away at everything that's unnecessary, everything that's tied to ego, and becoming really comfortable with this idea that we're just here for a short stop. I could talk about this forever. I will do a live here on YouTube. We'll go all in depth for the Neptune in Aries transit. So I have way more to say about it. Make sure you subscribe so that you catch that one. And of course, we cannot forget the last eclipse of this eclipse season. It happens on March 29th. It's a solar eclipse or a new moon, and it happens in Aries in your 12th house. Again, we see this theme of spirituality. New moon is a new beginning, and an eclipse, the fact that it's an eclipse makes it faded. So you might find that there's some new spiritual actions, new spiritual seeds that are being thrown your way, that are being forced on you, that might feel really weird, out of nowhere, maybe a bit uncomfortable. But in the end, if you do take them up and follow through with them, it will lead you to a better place. A faded new beginning in the 12th house would be anything that helps bring you perspective as to the fact that we are, what's that saying? We are spiritual beings having a human experience. All right, Gemini, let's talk about your March 2025 horoscope. As I shared in the general overview, we start the month a little bit on a difficult note. Venus goes retrograde right on March 1st, and the day after on March 2nd, we also have a square between the Sun and Jupiter. For you, Venus goes retrograde in your 11th house of friendships and long-term plans. Venus is about reevaluating our values. And specifically, you will be reevaluating if you're associating with the right groups, the right communities, and if your goals, your plans for 5 to 10 years from now, the things you're working towards in the future, are still in line with your values. During this beginning of March, like I said, on March 2nd, be very careful of not acting out of your ego very quickly, very suddenly, especially when it comes to the groups and communities you belong to. Sun square Jupiter can create strong egos, and especially because we are talking about a Venus retrograde in your 11th house, reevaluating the friendships you belong to, the communities you belong to. I want you to be very careful that you don't wake up one day and say, and burn all bridges. All of a sudden, go up to the wonderful groups you belong to for years, people that may have done so much for you in the last years, and just show up and say, well, I'm too good for you now. Not saying that you specifically are that type of person, but be very careful that you are not burning bridges out of ego during this time. If you do want to burn any bridges, I would just advise to wait until that square is over, so after March 2nd. So the sun throughout all of March, well, actually the first half of March, is whizzing through your 10th house, which is the sign of Pisces. Later, it will enter your 11th house, so we'll talk about that then. But as it's traveling through your 10th house, it's making a lot of aspects to many different planets. So what you'll see in March is that your public role, your image, your public image, is something that's front and center for you. For a lot of us today, that is, of course, our career, our work, but it doesn't have to be. It could be also this idea that the society views you as somebody's husband or somebody's wife. Society views you as somebody that is very influential in a certain sphere. Maybe you're very influential in the music world, or maybe you're very influential in something specific. Maybe you're like the black pepper expert in your specific area. So there could be many other things that determine our public image. It doesn't just have to be our career, for example. So we talked about that first aspect that the sun is making, which was that square with Jupiter. Later on March 8th, it makes its second aspect, which is a trine to Mars. This will be a wonderful time to do set boundaries, whether that's with your friendship group, because we have that Venus retrograde in your 11th house, but it could also be with at your career, at your workplace, set boundaries, or change up your public image so that it's more aligned with your boundaries. This is because the sun is in your 10th house and Mars is in your second. So you might especially be finding that you're feeling a lot more self-confident to do that. So that's why it might be easier on this day to really step into this self-confidence, this self-esteem, and set those boundaries to go to the public and say, well, I'm not actually that way. This is actually really who I am. To go up to a friend group and say, well, actually, this doesn't align with me anymore. Something needs to change. And as I shared in the general forecast, the sun moves quite fast. So just a couple of days later, 4 days later on March 12th, we might find ourselves going from feeling confident to feeling blocked. That's, one negative about the sun. It moves quite fast, but that also means that any aspects it makes also go by quite quickly. They're not something that stay along for a long time. So what's happening on the 12th is that the sun has traveled so far into your 10th house that it now conjuncts Saturn in your 10th house. And Gemini, this could feel like facing a roadblock in your career, facing a roadblock with your public image. Maybe you've been trying very hard to set yourself up as an expert, to set yourself up as somebody of service, somebody caring, as somebody spiritual, whatever it may be for you. But you might find that the reality hits you in some way and stops you from achieving that during this time. It's sort of like the public is saying like, you can't fool us. You can't just tell us that you're an expert. You need to let us determine that for you. You need to work hard and show us your skills and expertise before we grant you that public image. So, I mean, I laugh about it. I know it's probably not going to be pleasant for many of us, but we definitely see these themes of Saturn saying, yeah, you need to work if you want to achieve a certain persona, a certain public image. Then 2 days later, on March 14th, we have our first eclipse. It's a full moon. So the moon is in Virgo. The sun is in Pisces, which means that this is a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse does mean faded endings. And because for you, your 10th and 4th house are highlighted Gemini, it might be an especially important eclipse season. Whenever we see eclipses in the angular houses, so the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th, we usually see major outward changes. So a lot of the times, I mean, all of us are changing, of course, but a lot of the times it's a change, an internal change, or a change behind closed doors that people don't see. But when we talk about the angular houses, the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th, we're really talking about like you moving to a different apartment, you getting a new job, you changing your relationship, for example. It's really outwardly visible. For you, Gemini, it's on your 10th and 4th house axis. So we see any faded endings with your career and with your home place. Could also be with your family. All of that being said, my books are open for eclipse readings. I've opened up 5 spots at a very discounted price. We'll sit down together for 30 minutes and go through personally. We'll pull up your birth chart, see exactly how the eclipses work with your own birth chart, so we can get into a lot more of the nitty-gritty details. Again, there are only 5 spots available. I've left the link down below, so make sure you grab one before they're gone. Then we get to the later half of March, and specifically between the 20th and the 23rd, the sun has traveled so far in Pisces. It's at those final degrees of Pisces. It conjuncts Neptune right there at those 29 degrees of Pisces, enters Aries the next day, and then right afterwards, it conjuncts Venus. Remember, Venus went retrograde in Aries. All this time, it's been retrograding back. And by the time the sun enters Aries around March 20th, Venus is basically right there at the beginning degrees. So they end up conjuncting each other on March 23rd. So with the sun conjuncting Neptune, be very careful not to be disillusioned. It's this idea of somebody giving you a beautiful new job, and it just looks like the best thing ever. The pay's amazing, the people are amazing, the office is amazing. But be very careful, because Neptune can cause a bit of a disillusionment. Later, when the sun moves away from Neptune, you might realize, okay, I clearly wasn't seeing all the problems just yet. But at the same time, it can make us a little bit more receptive and inspired, sort of like with ideas coming from somewhere outside of ourselves. So be also very open during this conjunction that maybe some ideas about your public role, your public image may be coming up. You might get an inkling all of a sudden like, maybe I should be a yoga teacher. Or, well, I'm really good at cooking. Why don't I maybe pivot that way? These are just some examples, but there might be some inspiration coming from up above. And then as the sun enters your 11th house or Aries, you will most likely find that these considerations that you've been having about your public role, about your public persona, are now also sort of being zoomed out a little bit, and you're thinking a little bit more long term. Like, okay, yeah, this is what it is now, but like, where do I want it to go? How will this persona I have now affect me in the next 10 years? Can it help me achieve where I want to go and what I want to achieve? How can I achieve this persona, but by maybe associating myself with the right people? So there's a little bit of a shift there with your focus once the sun enters your 11th house. And there around March 23rd, when the sun ends up conjuncting Venus in your 11th house, you might also find that you're becoming a little bit more clear on these Venus retrograde themes. We talked about them at the beginning of your horoscope, Gemini. These themes of, are my communities and groups and friends aligned to where I want to go? Are my future goals, the things I'm working towards, still aligned to my values? When the sun and Venus conjunct on the 23rd, you might find there's a flicker of hope, a flicker of an idea of what needs to go, how things need to change. And what I will say is, this conjunction also sextiles Pluto. So we do see this need to face what we fear in order to be able to get that glimmer of hope or that glimmer of understanding. For you, Gemini, Pluto is in your 9th house of your beliefs, your values. So you might need to face fears about picking a side. Maybe there have been some ideas, some themes that you've been too afraid to say, well, this is where I stand. This is what I believe in. You've been maybe too afraid to state your political beliefs, your religious beliefs. And you might find this Venus retrograde is requiring you to get a bit of clarity on why are you afraid, and to face those fears by actually standing up for what you believe in. Then we get to the final parts of March, about 27th to the 30th, where basically Venus and Neptune switch positions. We have Venus retrograding so far back in Aries that it actually ends up entering Pisces, conjuncts Neptune at those final 29 degrees of Pisces. And just a couple of days later, Neptune moves past those 29 degrees and enters Aries. So they basically switch spots. Venus goes from Aries into Pisces. Neptune goes from Pisces into Aries. So with Venus entering your 10th house, retrograding back into your 10th house, we see that your reflection on the goals and the communities you belong to is also now shifting and having an impact on your public image, on your public persona, how people perceive you. Some ways that this could manifest, for example, you start thinking, okay, aligning with this group or hanging out with this group is no longer in alignment with me. Something needs to change. And then all of a sudden you start to realize, but wait a second, that's going to impact my public image. That's going to mean that all of a sudden I am perceived in a different way in the public. Is that still aligned to who I am? How will it impact how people treat me, how they view me? So we do see constantly back and forth this interaction between your 11th and your 10th house in March. When Neptune enters Aries, we are talking about a 13-year period of Neptune being in your 11th house. So you are definitely going to be aligning with spiritual friends, with spiritual groups. You are definitely going to be bringing spirituality into your plans for the future. And you might be letting this idea that there is more than just material things and having fun and accumulating lots of money. You might be bringing those values into letting it shape your future. For the next 13 years, as you become more clear on what is spirituality to you, how does it define your life, you might start to see that all of a sudden becoming a CEO is no longer part of your plan. All of a sudden you might realize that, wait a second, maybe I want to reduce the amount of hours I work so that I can do what actually matters, which is hang out with my family or with my friends. So there is definitely going to be that impact that Neptune makes on your future goals, your future plans. And of course, we cannot forget the final eclipse. It happens on March 29th, and this is a solar eclipse, which means it's a new moon. Both the sun and the moon will be in Aries in your 11th house. What I love about this solar eclipse is that the sun and the moon are like almost at the exact same degrees in Aries, the exact same degrees that Venus went retrograde at. So I do think that these Venus retrograde themes are going to come up during this solar eclipse. A solar eclipse means faded new beginnings. You might find that you make connections with people out of nowhere. You just bump into them on the street and it turns out they can connect you to their son who does exactly the thing that you wanted to do, or who can introduce you to that person who knows about that job. We might see some of those things happening about the solar eclipse. And you might find that there's just a faded beginnings that can really help you with your long-term goals as well. There's just all of a sudden a new position open at your workplace that puts you one step closer to achieving that final role that you are aiming for. All right, Cancer. So you start off March a little bit difficult, just like all of us, because we all have Venus going retrograde. For you specifically though, Cancer, Venus goes retrograde in your 10th house. which means that you are one of the 4 zodiac signs that will probably feel this retrograde the strongest. Venus going retrograde in your 10th house, you might find that you are reflecting on your public image values, your public persona, the role that you play in society, how others view you, and whether that is really aligned with your values. It's this idea of others perceiving you as somebody that is closed off and cold, but you realizing that that's not really who you are. You're somebody that's quite warm and quite open and quite loving. And there needs to be something to change there in order to make sure that the way society perceives you is truly who you are. For a lot of us, the 10th house does also represent our career. You know, a lot of the way that we're perceived in today's world is, you know, who are we? Are we a designer? Are we an electrician? So this might also really get you thinking about that. What is that role that you play 40 hours of the week or more? And is that really aligned with your values? Right here at the beginning of March, on March 2nd, we also have the Sun squaring Jupiter. This can bring out the worst of our egos. So I want you to be very careful with this Venus going retrograde. You're reflecting about your career. Be very careful not to get into your ego and think, well, I'm too good to be an electrician. I'm too good to be a designer. Like, this is so not aligned to who I am. And I say this sort of jokingly, but we all have that part of us. We all have our ego. But I just want you to be careful not to blow things out of proportion quite yet at the beginning of March. When Venus goes retrograde, there's not a lot of clarity. A lot of it is just us reflecting, going internal, thinking about things. So it's just not the right time to act, especially at the beginning of March. For you, Cancer, the Sun is in your 9th house for the first half of March, and it's going to move and make a lot of aspects to different planets. We already talked about that square to Jupiter. In a second, we'll talk about another aspect. But with the Sun in your 9th house for the first half, you see a lot of focus for you on building up your beliefs and actually taking a firm stand for what you believe in. You might be thinking about, do I have political views? Do I have religious views? What is my view on immigration? What is my view on abortion? These are just some examples. And you might be feeling like you need to maybe travel, you need to maybe get educated on these different issues in order that you can form your own belief. And to also to actually express it and to determine, this is what I believe. I have chosen a side, even though there's never just really 2 sides. So we talked about the Sun squaring Jupiter. It moves on, zooms through Pisces. The next aspect it makes is on March 8th, which is a trine with Mars. Mars is in your 1st house, Cancer. So you might find that this trine is making it easy for you to really express your beliefs and do so in sort of like a leadership position. I really find this aspect as, you're chilling with friends, you're having a dinner, and all of a sudden a topic comes up, and maybe people are a bit afraid to sort of like, they're like, I see how this side could be true and how this side could be true. And you sort of take that leadership position and sort of take a stand and say, well, actually, I do believe there's a side and I believe in this. And it's really acting in this leadership position, standing out from the crowd. You might find that with this trine, it's much easier to do that. And you are also inspiring others. You're a leader, you are inspiring others to maybe also set beliefs, pick a side, no longer sitting on the fence, So definitely, if you've been thinking about expressing what you believe in, March 8th, around that date, is a perfect time to do so. And as I said, in the general horoscope, the sun moves very fast. So even though on March 8th, we're feeling good, we're supported by Mars, a couple of days later on March 12th, the sun conjunct Saturn, and then all of a sudden we feel a bit roadblocked. So that's a challenging thing with sun aspects, but also an easy thing because they'll be over as soon as you know it. So what's happening on March 12th is the sun is conjuncting Saturn, and you might be feeling roadblocked. You might be feeling like there's some reality is setting in that makes it difficult for you to stand firm in your beliefs. Maybe, I hate to be this drastic, but maybe it's this idea that, wow, okay, I can tell my boss what I believe in on this topic, but actually reality tells me that I think he's going to fire me if I express this. It's a very literal roadblock preventing you from expressing your beliefs. I think for most of us, though, it's going to be a lot less critical, a lot less dramatic. I think for some of us, it might just be, hey, we ordered a book where we can read up on this topic, and all of a sudden, it doesn't come through, or we want to take a course to learn about some issue or some topic, and we realize we actually don't have the money or the time for it. But there's very much a roadblock preventing us from expressing our beliefs, and not even just expressing, but just determining them ourselves. Maybe we just don't have time to contemplate the different sides and to really make up our mind. That's also a very real Saturn block, not having time. Then 2 days later, on March 14th, we have that eclipse. We have our first eclipse of 2025, which is a lunar eclipse. This means that it's a full moon. The sun is in Pisces, in your 9th house, and the moon is in Virgo, in your 3rd house. A full moon means faded endings. So Cancer, you might find that something comes upon you that forces you to end a certain belief, that forces you to drop a certain belief, that the 3rd house is also coming up with this eclipse, that forces you to stop communicating in a certain way. This could, of course, manifest many different ways. I cannot help but we think we have chosen a political party, we think we have chosen where we stand on the issue of immigration, and all of a sudden we meet an immigrant, or we meet somebody from the other political party, and we start talking to them, and we realize, crap, we may have chosen the wrong side. There might be certain endings that just come out of nowhere, that are, in essence, forced upon us, but in the end, if we do allow ourselves to be influenced by the eclipses, most of the time we do see that it has positive effects on our lives. So all of that being said, I am opening my books for personal eclipse readings. They're 30 minutes long. We sit down one-on-one. We pull up your birth chart and talk specifically how it impacts you, so we can go into a lot more details. These are at a discounted price, and there's only 5 of them available, so make sure you snag one up down below. I've left the link in the comments. Then about halfway through March, we have, the sun has been whizzing past Pisces, past your 9th house. It gets to basically the final degrees of Pisces, and they're conjunct to Neptune. The day after, it enters Aries, or your 10th house. And because Venus has been retrograding backwards, it's now at basically the beginning degrees of Aries. So therefore, when the sun enters Aries, it also conjuncts Venus. So it's quite a few aspects within a 3-day period, from the 20th to the 23rd. Conjunction with Neptune, the sun entering your 10th house, and then a conjunction with Venus. With the conjunction in Neptune, be very careful not to be disillusioned in your beliefs. If you hear a crazy story about an immigrant or a political party, if it seems too good to be true, probably is with when the sun is conjunct Neptune. So don't make any decisions, I think, until that aspect has moved away, then you can see things a bit more clearly. But once the sun enters Aries or your 10th house, you might see that your focus is now transiting to your public role. You've been doing this reflection on your values, on your beliefs, and you might find that now you're thinking about, okay, now that I've done this overview, how am I actually showing up? How are people viewing me? Do people see these values and these beliefs reflected in the way I show up? So that focus is shifting a little bit. And especially because when the sun enters Aries, and it's also conjuncting that retrograde Venus, you might find on this day, on the 23rd, that there may be a little hope, a little glimmer of clarity that's coming through around these Venusian themes. You've already been considering, like, okay, what is my public role? What is my career? Is it still aligned to who I am and what I want to do? And now that the sun has entered the 10th house, you might be getting an idea, okay, yeah, maybe not an electrician, but I still enjoy working with my hands. So things might be getting a little bit more clear when it comes to your 10th house themes. What I love about this Sun-Venus conjunction is that it sextiles Pluto in your 8th house. This shows to me that if we are to get a glimmer of clarity with this Venus retrograde, we need to face what we fear. Specifically for you, Cancer, you need to face the fear you have in showing these hidden parts of you, maybe these more like taboo parts of you, to the public. Maybe there's a part of you that really loves money, but money's not really a thing we talk about a lot in society, and we really don't like others to think that we care or we love money. And there's this sort of part of you it's like a bit hidden, like you haven't really expressed it to others, maybe just to those closest to you. You might need to start facing those fears that you have around, wow, what if I showed this hidden part to others? What would they think of me? Are they going to judge me? How's that going to work? That sextile with Pluto, I love it. We close off March with basically Venus and Neptune switching positions. Venus, remember, is like right at the beginning of Aries. It's been retrograding, and it retrogrades so far back that it enters back into Pisces. When it enters back into Pisces, Neptune is right there at the end degrees. It ends up conjuncting Neptune. And then literally just a day later, Neptune ends up entering Aries. So they sort of do a switcheroo. This period is from the 27th until the 30th of March. And therefore, you might find that this Venus retrograde is bringing up the themes of your values and your beliefs yet again. It started with you reflecting whether your values are accurately showing up in your workplace, in the role that you play. And now that it's entered your 9th house, you might also be wondering, what are those values, and are they also true? Are they something that's still applicable for you? So we see this 9th and 10th house just really interchangeable and being highlighted over and over in March. And then there on March 30th, when Neptune enters Aries, your 10th house, you are starting a 13-year period, Cancer. 13 years, Neptune is going to be in your 10th house. I'll do a live later. We'll go in depth about Neptune. We'll go through all of the rising signs. But just quickly, for the sake of this horoscope, Neptune in your 10th house might start bringing in some spiritual aspects in the role you play in society. That's all I'm going to say for now. And then, of course, we cannot forget about the final solar eclipse of this eclipse season. This happens on March 29th, and this is a solar eclipse. It's a new moon in your 10th house in the sign of Aries. This is a fated new beginning. in your career. It could very much be this idea of a career just lands in your lap and all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, now I'm a painter. Okay, now I'm a barista. It could also be that, maybe you don't change your jobs completely, but something happens in your workplace that just seems like falls out of nowhere that changes your role, changes your responsibilities. So there's definitely, especially for you, Cancer, because this is happening in an angular house, there might definitely be a wonderful new beginning for you during this eclipse. All right, Leo, let's talk about your March horoscope. As I shared in the general forecast, we start the month a little bit rocky. We do have Venus going retrograde right on March 1st, and just a day later on the 2nd, we have a square between the Sun and Jupiter. Venus goes retrograde in your 9th house, so we definitely see you reevaluating your beliefs and your values. What religion do you believe in? What political party do you believe in? Which local communities do you support? Do you value being a kind human being? Do you value spending time with your family, or do you value money? Not saying that one is better than the other. This is definitely up for reconsideration for you during the Venus retrograde. Because we also have that square between Jupiter and the Sun, be very careful at the beginning of March not to force your beliefs onto others, not to be too much in your ego, almost like feeling that you're better because you believe in something compared to others believing in something else. Especially because you are starting a really reflective period. You might find that during the Venus retrograde, you realize, crap, I shouldn't have said what I said. I shouldn't have did what I did at the beginning of March, because now I'm starting to realize that maybe my values were not true to me, that maybe my beliefs were misinformed. So definitely be very careful not to act out of ego at the beginning of March. Overall, for you, Leo, the Sun will spend the first half of March in your 8th house. This is where it's making a lot of those aspects. It's in your 8th house that it squares Jupiter. It's in your 8th house that it's going to do all the other aspects, especially for this first half of the month. So you might find that the 8th house themes are front and center for you during March. You might be thinking about death. You might be thinking about intimacy. You might be thinking about being vulnerable, showing the weird parts of you to others. You might be a lot more aligned to sort of like spiritual, occulty type of things. You might be more into astrology. The 8th house is the house of hidden things. So definitely we might be seeing you feeling like there are, I don't want to say parts of you that you're hiding, but it might feel very clear like, okay, this is a part of me I show, and this is a part of me that I keep for private. So the second aspect that the Sun makes in your 8th house is on March 8th, and it's a trine to Mars. Remember, Mars was retrograde at the beginning of this year. So now that we have this trine with Mars, you might feel like, oh, finally, I can actually set boundaries. Finally, I can actually like stand up for myself. And for you, Leo, it's quite interesting because they are both, the Sun and Mars, in very internal houses, not very outward-facing houses. So you might find that it's almost like you're setting boundaries within yourself. You might find that you need to stand up for yourself to yourself. You need to tell yourself, hey, you need to stop doing that because this is hurting us. Hey, you need to start doing that because this is going to help us. So you definitely might find that internally, maybe in your mind, you are setting boundaries with yourself. Then, as the sun whizzes through Pisces, it finishes that trine with Mars, and then it comes to conjunct Saturn. So on March 12th, the sun conjuncts Saturn, and you might feel on this day like there are certain roadblocks in your way that are perhaps preventing you from accessing these hidden parts of you or being in touch with them. There might be certain roadblocks that come in your way that prevent you from perhaps being as open and as honest with your partner as you would have liked to. Perhaps there are very real roadblocks like your time and your energy that are taking up your time and your energy that you just don't have any energy to give to your partner, for example. We are talking about like the 8th house, which is also taxes. So you might find that there's a very real tax roadblock in your way. You might find it a bit more difficult to also access the hidden parts of you that you feel like maybe before were more easily accessible, and now you're maybe a bit like, oh, but what do I even believe, or what do I want to do? It's almost like you are maybe a bit of a mystery to yourself. Again, the sun moves quite fast, so keep in mind that this will also be a very, it will be an effect that will not last very long. 2 days later, on March 14th, we have our first eclipse of 2025. It's a lunar eclipse, which means that it's a full moon. The sun is in Pisces, the moon is in Virgo. For you, Leo, these are your 8th and 2nd house. And with a lunar eclipse, we see a fated ending. This could be an ending that has to do with finances. This could be an ending that has to do with taxes, with inheritances. This could be an ending that has to be with, or that has to do with the way you show up in your vulnerable relationships. An ending to maybe if you had any roadblocks with being intimate. Those, for example, could be some of the fated endings that you see around this lunar eclipse. I do also want to let you know that I have my books open for eclipse readings. I've only made 5 spots available just because of what my time allows. These are heavily discounted and will have half an hour one-on-one. We'll pull up your birth chart and really look at exactly what these eclipses are going to mean for you. Again, only 5 spots are available, so make sure you snag one up before they're gone. I've left a link for you down below. Then around halfway through March, so we're talking March 20th to March 23rd, we have the sun reaching the final degrees of Pisces. It ends up conjuncting Neptune, who's right there at the edge of Pisces. Then the sun enters Aries, and believe it or not, Venus has been retrograding, and it's traveled so far back that it's now at the beginning degrees of Aries. So therefore, when the sun enters Aries, it also conjuncts Venus. With the sun entering your 9th house, or the sign of Aries, you might find that the focus you've had on these hidden parts of you, the things you've maybe learned about intimacy and vulnerability, the things you've learned about death, taxes, money, you might find that now that the sun enters Aries, you need to sort of integrate them into your beliefs and into your values. When the sun is conjuncting Venus, which is on March 23rd, you might find that there is a bit of clarity and just a bit of a glimmer of hope, or maybe an idea of what this Venus retrograde could be teaching you. Again, during a retrogrades, we usually are not ready yet to take action. Not everything is clear yet, but I do think because the sun will be conjuncting Venus, there will be a bit of an understanding. Some puzzle pieces start to come together. And what I love about the Sun and Venus conjunction is that it sextiles Pluto, meaning that in order to get this glimmer of hope, this glimmer of understanding of what Venus retrograde is trying to teach us, we need to face our fears. And for you, Leo, you need to face your fears with your relationship, whatever that may be. Are you afraid of becoming too close to someone, getting hurt? Are you afraid of letting a previous relationship go, stepping into a new one? Are you afraid of how dependent you could become on another person and lose some of that independence? But there's definitely something that you fear when it comes to your relationship that you need to face. And this Venus retrograde is going to ask of that. And then we reach the end of March. So we're talking about around March 27th, where we basically have Venus and Neptune switching positions. Venus has retrograded so far back that it actually leaves Aries and enters Pisces. There at the final degrees of Pisces, it conjuncts Neptune. And then just a couple of days later, on the 30th of March, Neptune ends up entering Aries. So with Venus retrograding back into your 8th house, you might see that the Venusian retrograde themes, where you were reflecting on your beliefs and your values, are now also shifting and almost having an impact on your innermost parts of you. Whereas the first part of the Venus retrograde may have been a lot more of like, okay, like what political parties do I believe in? Or, what is my view on immigration? Or do I actually tell others I believe something, but actually I haven't really made up my mind? Or vice versa, do I tell people, oh, I don't know what I believe, but I truly, really do know what I believe. I'm just afraid to say it. Now with Venus shifting into the 8th, it's almost as if that reflection and that introspection is more on the values that have to do with the innermost parts of you. The values that have to do with death. What do I think about death? Do I let the thought of it mean anything to me? Do I let the idea of it, the realization that it exists, actually influence how I show up and what I value? Do I let this vulnerability, the fact that we can all be very vulnerable, we can be put in positions where we have to depend on others, in positions where we don't have power, do I let that realization, do I let that very clear state also influence my values and affect how I live and how I show up? So the themes of the Venus retrograde might get a little bit more heavy, a little bit more serious, a little bit more dramatic. And then on the 30th, when Neptune does enter Aries or your 9th house, it's starting a 13-year period. Neptune is going to be in your 9th house for 13 years, Leo. I'll do a live later on Neptune and Aries, so we can talk about it in much detail. But just for now, all I will say is that there might be a very great focus for you for the next 13 years on spiritual education and maybe even spiritual travel. And of course, we cannot forget about the final eclipse of this eclipse season. It happens on March 29th, and it's a solar eclipse, which means that the sun and the moon are together in the sky and they are in Aries, in your 9th house. With a solar eclipse, we're talking about fate and new beginnings. And you might happen to have a book that falls out of the sky, a book that you come across on the street, that if you end up picking it up and you end up reading it, might change your life. There might be a course that gets shown to you on Instagram, on YouTube, whatever platform you use, that if you pay attention to it and you take it on, that you might find it changes your life. There might be a travel invitation that, again, if you take that opportunity, changes your life as you know it. All right, Virgo, let's talk about your March 2025 horoscope. As I shared in the general overview, we start off a bit rocky. We start off with a Venus retrograde, which happens on March 1st. And just the day after, we also have the Sun squaring Jupiter. The Venus retrograde happens in your 8th house. So we are talking about a deep introspective time for you. The 8th house already on its own is quite an internal, hidden house. Taboo topics like taxes and death, money. And especially when we have Venus retrograding there, you might be reflecting on those themes, and you might be thinking about your values surrounding them, your thoughts surrounding them, and how you let them influence your life or not influence your life. We're talking about, do you really have people that you trust, that you can be unapologetically open with, that you can be honest with, that you can, ugly cry in front of? Have you been contemplating on a regular basis the fact that we're all going to die one day? And have you let that influence you positively in the way you show up in your day-to-day life? Have you been practicing being intimate with somebody? And how has that been going? Is there maybe a reconsideration that needs to be happened? Have you opened up and been intimate with somebody that maybe you shouldn't have trusted? So it can be quite dramatic Venus retrograde for you, Virgo, but definitely nothing to be scared about. What I will say is that the 8th house can bring up a lot of fears. It's originally associated with Scorpio, which is very much about this deep, dark belly of the waters. It could bring up a lot of fears, and especially because we have that Jupiter square Sun, be also very careful that your reaction to being put in a fearful situation is not one of ego. That you are not in a situation where you feel vulnerable, and how you respond is, well, I'm better than you, or, well, you suck in this way, that you sort of use that situation because you feel vulnerable yourself to put the other person down, so that you're in control again. So be very, very careful not to be acting out of your ego during this time. So the Sun is in your 7th house. It's going to be in your 7th house for the first half of March. And while it's in your 7th house, it is continually touching different planets, having aspects, conversations, as I like to call it, with different planets. This means that in March, a lot of your focus is going to be on relationships. A lot of your focus is going to be on not only what do you look for in a partner, but also what type of a partner do you want to be as well. So at first, we talked about that Sun square Jupiter. And later on March 8th, we have the second aspect that the Sun makes as it's in your 7th house, which is a trine with Mars. Remember that Mars was retrograde for pretty much the first 2 months in 2025. So we might have felt like we really couldn't express our boundaries, maybe couldn't express our frustrations or our anger. And therefore, on March 8th, having this supportive aspect between the Sun and Mars might really help us to finally set some boundaries. For you, we see 2 relational houses highlighted, the 7th and the 11th. So it might be especially you setting boundaries with your friends, or you setting boundaries with your partner. And around March 8th is a really good time to do so in a way that it's just harmonious, in a way that it's not too egotistical or too harsh. You might find that that trine really supports you in setting the boundaries in just the right way. Then the Sun keeps on moving, moves a bit further in Pisces, and then on March 12th, it conjuncts Saturn. Saturn in your 7th house, it's been there for, I guess, about 1.5 years now. We're almost there, I promise, Virgo. But especially around the 12th, when the Sun conjuncts Saturn, you might feel like there's a very real roadblock in the way that is perhaps preventing you from connecting with your partner, perhaps preventing you from showing up as the partner that you want to be. This could be, something as simple as you're just too tired from work. So when you come home, you don't have the energy to give to your partner. It could be something as real as you need to pick up a second job because you need more money, and therefore you never see your partner anymore. There is definitely a roadblock around March 12th. But keep in mind, the sun moves quite fast. So that also means that the roadblock should clear up quite quickly as well. And then, of course, we have our first lunar eclipse of 2025. This is happening on March 14th. The sun is in Pisces, the moon is in Virgo, which basically means that this is a full moon. With this lunar eclipse, we're seeing faded endings. For you, Virgo, this could be with your relationships. It could be with the way you show up in a relationship. Doesn't mean that your relationship will end. It could be the way you show up in your relationship, that you turn a new page and you decide to be a new type of partner. Or that you decide you stop being a certain type of partner. It could also mean that there is a certain ending in your partner's life, that there is an end to a certain habit that they have, or an ending to their job, or an ending in some other way, because the 7th house again represents the partner. What I will share, Virgo, is that I do have my books open. This is an angular house for you. The eclipses will be happening in an angular house, Virgo, which could mean that it has quite a strong impact for you. So if you do feel like you need extra support, I have 5 spots available for personal eclipse readings. They're 30 minutes long. We'll get one-on-one time to pull up your chart, really look at what it means for you. And they are available at a discounted price. So make sure you snag one up down in the comments before they're gone. Then in the middle of March, so between the 20th to the 23rd, we have the sun so far into Pisces that it's actually at the final degrees of Pisces. There it conjuncts Neptune. Then it enters Aries. And actually Venus has retrograded so far back that it's right there at those beginning degrees of Aries. And the sun ends up conjuncting Venus. With the sun conjunct Neptune on March 20th in your 7th house, be very mindful that things in your relationship might seem more rosy or more perfect than they actually are. During this time, don't make any decisions, don't take any actions just yet, because you might find later that actually you weren't seeing things as clearly as you should have. And then once the sun enters your 8th house, you might find that your focus is also a lot more on the deeper parts of your relationship. Whereas in the beginning parts of March, you were maybe more focused on the external parts of your relationship. Maybe, okay, do I like this person? Okay, like are our routines aligned? I like working out, but he doesn't. Whatever. More of the superficial parts of a relationship. But around the middle of March, when the sun enters your 8th house, you might be more focused on those deeper layers of the relationship. Can I really open up and trust this person? Will this person have my back if I lose everything? Is this idea of, will this person still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? It's facing the part of the relationship on a more deeper level. And because the sun, when it enters your 8th house, it will also conjunct Venus, you might find that once you start considering these deeper layers, things also start to become a little bit more clear with this Venus retrograde. With a big caveat, usually things are not very clear when a planet is retrograde. We usually have to wait when it goes direct to be able to take action and see things clearly. But I do find that this conjunction might start to give us little inklings of, okay, this works, this doesn't work, even if we don't know the answers yet. We are getting clarity on what's happening and what's working and what's not working. What I love about this conjunction on the 23rd between the Sun and Venus is that it sextiles Pluto in your 6th house. We see a need in order for you to get clarity with these Venusian themes. We see a need for you to face your fears. And you might specifically have to face your fears, the sense of control that having a routine brings to your life. With the 8th house, things are messy, things are chaotic, things are ugly. And with the 6th house, things are orderly. We get up at the same time, we eat the same food, we have a routine, we go to work every day, we talk to the same people. So in order to really get to the depths of your partnership, you might also have to really address the fears that you have. What happens? The fears you have of losing control. The fear you have of what might happen when you no longer have a routine. If your life looks entirely in a different way, would you still be with this person? Or is this person really closely tied to your routine of how it looks today? So I really love this sextile with Pluto. Then towards the end of March, we essentially have Venus and Neptune swapping spots. Remember, Venus is right there at those beginning degrees of Aries. Around March 27th, it retrogrades so far back that it enters Pisces. And remember, Neptune is right there at the end degrees of Pisces, so Venus ends up conjuncting Neptune. And literally just a couple of days later, on March 30th, Neptune finally enters Aries. So they basically swap spots. Venus enters Pisces and Neptune enters Aries. Neptune entering Aries is a 13-year period. It's going to be in Aries for 13 years, so it's starting off a brand new period for you. I am going to do a live later in March talking in way more detail about this transit. This means that for the next 13 years, you are coming to realize how being in a relationship can be an entire spiritual experience on its own. How being connected to somebody in such a way that they almost seem to understand you and read your thoughts before you even say anything. To an understanding where opening up to somebody, sharing your thoughts with somebody, forms a bond that you feel like will span lifetimes. So there's definitely a possibility for the next 13 years to develop these types of almost spiritual connections with your partner in the future. And I think the fact that we have a Venus retrograde starting off this 13-year transit, it's a really nice way to start it. It's almost like, okay, let's take note of everything that's not working. Let's take note of everything that needs to change. And then you can start off that 13-year period with sort of some notes of like, okay, this is what I want to accomplish at the end of this 13 years. And of course, we cannot forget the last eclipse of this eclipse season. It's a solar eclipse, happens on March 29, and it happens in your 8th house. So the sun and the moon are in your 8th house. And what I do love is that the sun and the moon are basically almost at the same degrees Venus was in when it went retrograde at the beginning of March. So there's definitely going to be the Venus retrograde themes coming back up again with this eclipse. The solar eclipse tells us that there is a fated new beginning. A fated new beginning when it comes to your intimate relationships, when it comes to how vulnerable and honest and open you are with somebody. You might find yourself opening up to your partner in a way that you never have before. You might find that you meet somebody that you can trust in a way you've never been able to trust others before. So definitely take the opportunities that are coming your way during this solar eclipse. Next up, we have a Libra, and Libra, we do start off March on a bit of a rocky start. Right away on March 1st, we have Venus going retrograde. Venus goes retrograde in your 7th house. So this is definitely going to make you wonder about your relationship. It's going to make you want to reflect on the partner you're with, as well as what type of partner you are. What do you expect and value in a partnership? What is of importance to you? And right away on March 2nd, we also have the Sun squaring Jupiter. So I do want to caution you, while you're reflecting on this, not to act too much out of your ego, not to say or do something in your partnership that you might later regret. You know, if you're having second thoughts, if you're thinking through things, not to go to your partner and say, well, I'm so much better than you, I deserve better. And then later think of what you said and sit and realize that it was really coming from your ego and that it wasn't true, and you really regret saying it. So do be very, very mindful of your ego at the beginning of March. So as I mentioned in the general horoscope, the sun is front and center in March. It's moving quite fast. I mean, as the normal pace that it usually does. But this time around, basically anytime it makes a move, it makes an aspect to a certain planet. We already talked about the square with Jupiter. Next, on March 8th, we have a trine with Mars. But before we get to that, the sun is moving through your 6th house. It'll be there for the first half of March. So we definitely see a focus for you in March on the service that you bring to others, on your responsibilities. You might be very focused on what it is that you bring to the world, maybe what it is that you bring to the relationship. Again, remember, we talked about that Venus retrograde in your 7th house. And in general, is there a specific skill, a specific quality that you contribute to this world? And based on that, do you have certain responsibilities that you carry with it? So there's definitely a focus on that. You might also find that there could be a focus on your routine, really establishing something solid for yourself, so that, again, you can show up and be of service. Because, of course, if we're not rested, if we're not eating well, if we're not moving our body, we're troubled by those things, and it's very difficult to be of service and to take care of our responsibilities in a proper way. So as I shared, we have on March 8th, the sun trining Mars. Remember, Mars was like retrograde for the beginning 2 months of 2025. So you might have felt like you couldn't express your anger and frustration very well. And for you, Libra, this retrograde was in your 10th house. So it might have really impacted you because this is an angular house. It's a sun-set house. Now, though, because the sun is trining it, you might feel like this is a great day to set boundaries, to stand in your power. We're talking about Mars after all. And specifically, there might be some boundaries you need to set, some frustrations you need to express when it comes to your responsibilities. Perhaps you find that you have too many things on your plate and you need to set some boundaries so that you can really focus on that one quality, that one skill that you want to improve, that you want to focus on. You might really need to set a boundary with all of the things that are taking you away from the focus you need in your routine. Are you trying to do 50 things in your morning routine? Do you maybe have your friendships or your career pulling you in a different way, away from the focus that you want to have? So March 8th is a great time to say something, to take some action, to set some boundaries around that. Then again, the sun keeps moving on. It moves quite fast, as I've said already many times. And then a couple of days later, on March 12th, it conjuncts Saturn in your 6th house. The Saturn conjunction can bring a feeling that there's a roadblock in the way. It might be that reality is saying, well, no, you cannot focus on your the service, the quality, the skill you want to bring to this world because you have children or you have other responsibilities that realistically, you cannot just drop. There might be a very real roadblock of, well, you want to get better at something, you want to hire a personal trainer, you want to eat healthier, but maybe is no money for that at this point in time. So keep in mind, however uncomfortable, that just as soon or as fast as this conjunction happened, it will also be over. So the roadblock should feel like it moves out of the way fairly quickly. And then we get to the first eclipse of 2025, the first eclipse of this eclipse season. It happens on March 14th, and it's a lunar eclipse. This means that it's a full moon with the sun in Pisces and the moon in Virgo. For you, it highlights your 6th and 12th house. With a lunar eclipse, we're looking at faded endings. So there might be an ending in your routine that is sort of forced upon you, that all of a sudden something happens with your routine that you don't need to take care of something anymore. Or all of a sudden, this is a horrible example, but your plants all die and now you don't have to worry about watering them anymore. A very lighthearted example, but it's again this idea that it frees up your time, it frees up your plate of responsibilities so that you can have a focus and a determination. Maybe the food in your area, there's like an outbreak and it forces you to stop eating that type of food and switch to a different type of food. Again, an ending that might feel forced, might feel uncomfortable, but as always with the eclipses, we are talking about it's moving us in a direction that later we will figure out it was for the best and it helped us in some way. I will do, or I am doing eclipse readings. I have 5 spots open for a one-on-one 30-minute reading. We'll sit down, we'll look at your personal birth chart, really take a look at what planets are being touched, what else is happening, much more in detail. So if you do need support for this eclipse season, make sure you snag one up before they're gone. They are at a discounted price, so this is a good time to get one. Then we reach the middle of March, from about the 20th to the 23rd, where we have the sun ending its time in Pisces and entering Aries. As it does that, it conjuncts Neptune at those final degrees of Aries, or the final degrees of Pisces. And then when it enters Aries, it conjuncts Venus right there at those beginning degrees of Aries. With the sun moving away from your 6th into your 7th house, Libra, we are looking at almost the shift of focus. You were quite focused on responsibilities and routine, and now you are shifting your focus to the responsibilities that you have as a partner, the responsibilities that you have to your partnership. And the focus might be more on that. You might be thinking about, you're thinking about service, what you bring into the world. And now with the sun in your 7th house, that takes on a more relationship focus. How can you be of service to your partner? What is it that you bring to this partnership? And with the sun conjuncting Venus right there at the beginning of Aries, you might find that during these 3 days, there's also a bit of a twinkle of hope, a bit of a piece of clarity over what this Venusian retrograde could be bringing up, what it could be teaching us. It might not feel like you can take action yet. Usually that doesn't happen until Venus goes direct. But it might start to become a bit more clear, like, okay, there's still 10 things I haven't figured out, but this one and this too, okay, I think I know which way I'm heading. I think I know what's not working anymore. And what I love about this conjunction is that it's also sextiling Pluto, which shows us that we need to face what we fear. And I do think that with this sextile, when we start looking at those fears in the face, when we start addressing them, we don't hide them under the carpet, that Venusian retrograde is going to start to become more clear. Okay, this is what it's trying to teach me. This is where it's leading me. Then towards the end of the month, we have Venus and Neptune basically switching spots. Venus is at the beginning of Aries. It retrogrades so far back that it enters Pisces. And remember, Neptune was right at those final degrees of Pisces, and then it ends up switching and entering Aries on March 30th. With Neptune entering your 7th house, it is going to be there for 13 years. So this is definitely a very big change. Neptune was in your 6th house for also about 13 years. So therefore, there will definitely be a shift. I will do a live later in March talking more in detail about Neptune and Aries. But for now, it does signal a period of 13 years where the connection with your partner and your partnership, spirituality starts to become a more central part of it. Being able to relate to your partner in your spiritual way, being able to feel supported by them spiritually, the next 13 years, that will be an underlying theme for your relationship. And of course, we cannot forget the last eclipse of this eclipse season. It happens on March 29th. It's a solar eclipse or a new moon in the sign of Aries. The sun and the moon will be at just about the same degrees that Venus was in when it went retrograde. So definitely 100%, this solar eclipse will be tied to those Venus retrograde themes that you might have been experiencing in March. A solar eclipse shows a fade and new beginning. This is in your 7th house, Libra, so there might be a fade and new beginning in your partnerships. Perhaps your partner starts a new job, your partner changes where they live, something changes in your partner's life, they get new responsibilities. It could also be changes in the type of partner you are. It could, of course, also mean getting into a new partnership as well. So definitely take this new opportunity. It might feel strange at first, but in the end, eclipses are usually leading us towards where we need to go. All right, Scorpio, let's have a chat about March 2025 and what you can expect. So all of us will be facing Venus going retrograde on March 1st, basically. For you, Venus is going retrograde in your 6th house of responsibilities, your day-to-day routine. With Venus going retrograde, you're probably going to be rethinking, reflecting on your responsibilities. Do you perhaps have too many things on your plate and some things need to be let go of? Do you maybe have some responsibility, or do you value something, but that's not reflected in your responsibilities? You value your relationship, but you spend almost no time, or no part of your routine is centered around your relationship, for example. With the 6th house, we're also thinking about being of service, being in a sort of subservient type of role where we can really help somebody. So with Venus going retrograde, you might also be reflecting on, can you be of service? What can you bring to the world? What is your unique quality, your unique skill that you can contribute to the rest of society with? So that might be more of a larger theme that you're reflecting on. Right away on March 2nd, we have the Sun square Jupiter. So be very mindful that, with Venus going retrograde, you might start thinking like, oh, okay, well, I don't know if all of these responsibilities, if I need to do them all. Be very careful. A Sun square Jupiter can make us quite egotistical. So be careful during this time to say or do things that you might regret. All of a sudden be like, well, I'm quitting all of these responsibilities because I'm too good for that. And then later you start to realize, ooh, yeah, okay, maybe I shouldn't have acted that way. Usually we don't have clarity until a planet goes direct. So just consider from March 1st, there might be, things you're reflecting on, little inklings of clarity coming through, but usually action is not recommended until the planet goes direct. We also see your fifth house being very front and center during March. This is because the sun is there. We also have the eclipses there, so it's definitely prominent. But especially the sun is going to be there for the first half of March, and it's there that it's going to have a lot of aspects with different planets. We already talked about the square with Jupiter. On March 8th, it does have, the sun has a trine with Mars as well. But definitely this fifth house of how you express yourself, being able to get in touch with this joyful, almost childlike wonder of life. We do see that part quite prominent for you in March. So on March 8th, the sun does trine Mars, which could mean that you finally feel like you can express some of the boundaries that may have been overstepped when Mars was retrograde. And I do think that what could especially help make this boundary setting that much stronger is if you do step into these fifth house activities. If you do make sure that you spend time having fun, taking care of your inner child, make sure you have time for pleasurable things that bring you joy. It could be as simple as like taking some time to color or to sing in the shower or to dance in your room. It doesn't need to be anything extravagant, but I do really recommend that in March. The sun moves quite fast, so only a couple of days later on March 12th, it's going to move further into your fifth house and end up conjuncting Saturn, who's right there in your fifth house as well. So with this conjunction, it might feel like it's a bit more difficult to be joyful and to take time for fun and pleasurable activities. It might very realistically be that you need to spend overtime at your work, and therefore you cannot spend time in the evening dancing in your room or singing in the shower. Be very mindful that the sun moves quite fast. So to be fair, as quick as this roadblock comes in the way, it's also going to be lifted, and you should find it a bit more easier to step into this joyful part of you. And then we have our lunar eclipse. This is the first eclipse of 2025, which is very exciting. It happens on March 14th, and it's basically a full moon, which means that the sun is in Pisces and the moon is in Virgo. For you, this highlights your 5th and 11th house, and with a lunar eclipse, we are talking about fated endings. So there might be certain endings that come your way with these 5th house themes. You might find that there are certain activities that used to bring you pleasure and joy that are now changing. That these types of activities no longer serve you the way that they used to. There might be a certain ending, a certain way that you were treating your inner child that no longer works, that is put to a stop. Good thing to know is that I do have my books open for one-on-one personal eclipse readings. So if you do want extra support, you're curious about like what are the actual aspects to your personal planets, then I highly recommend booking one. There are only 5 available, and they are at a highly discounted price. You can grab one down below in the comments. Then about halfway through the month, so from the 20th until the 23rd, we have the sun has traveled basically at the end degrees of Pisces. There it conjuncts Neptune. It ends up entering Aries. And believe it or not, Venus has retrograded so far back that it's at those beginning degrees of Aries. So when the sun enters Aries, it also conjuncts Venus. We see this transition from the sun, of the sun from the 5th house to the 6th house as this natural progression from using the things that bring us joy, that bring us pleasure, and seeing if we can maybe turn them into some type of service that we can bring to the world. And you might naturally find that you shift in attention that way as well. With the sun in your 5th house, perhaps you have found out a little bit more about what is it that brings you joy, what is it that satisfies your inner child, what brings you pleasure. And now that you're shifting a little bit more to a focus on your responsibilities, you might also be wondering, hey, how can I incorporate that into it? Maybe, okay, dancing in my room can stay to my room, but maybe there is something I can do with my coloring pleasure and joy that I can use to also bring joy and pleasure to others. And this doesn't have to mean, make all of your hobbies into a side hustle. That's not what I'm getting into here. But there might be this focus of, how can I bring this pleasure and joy to others as well? It could be as simple as buying an extra coloring book and giving it to your colleague that you see struggling. If you think about it, you didn't make any money off of that, but it's still a service that you have helped bring, a service that you have offered to somebody else's life that also hopefully brings joy and happiness and a little bit of ease into their life as well. Around March 23rd, when the sun ends up conjuncting Venus and Aries, you might find that there's little inklings, little glimmers of clarity coming about in regards to these Venusian themes. It might not be that everything makes sense, you know exactly what to do, but it's more that there's a feeling that there's maybe light at the end of the tunnel. As you've been living with these themes for almost a full month, things start to make a little bit more sense as to what this Venus retrograde is all about for you. And I will say, we also have the conjunction between the Sun and Venus sextile Pluto, which to me means that in order to deal with these Venusian themes, in order to understand them and to start getting clarity on them, we need to face what we fear. For you, Scorpio, Pluto is in your 4th house. So maybe there are some fears that have to do with your family, perhaps how they view you or what they think of you. Perhaps some fears as to your home, the literal sanctuary that you've created. Or maybe even with your internal world, with the foundations, the upbringing that you come from. Do you feel like those fears are perhaps holding you back from the real service that you can bring to others, to the real contribution you can make to society? Then towards the end of the month, March 27th to about the 30th, we have Venus and Neptune basically switching positions. Venus retrogrades so far back that it enters back into Pisces and conjuncts Neptune. There are those final degrees of Pisces. And then, of course, on the 30th, Neptune enters Aries. So Venus, who was in Aries, gets into Pisces, and Neptune, who was in Pisces, gets into Aries. What I love about Neptune entering Aries is it is starting a 13-year period. So it is definitely a big change. You might not see right away changes on the 30th, but don't worry, there's 13 years to literally work with that energy. With Neptune entering your 6th house for the next 13 years, you might be focusing on implementing spiritual practices into your routine. Literally just sitting down every day, 15 minutes for meditation, and focusing on the routine and the consistency of that. Another way that Neptune in your 6th house can manifest is using service, using this contribution to society as a way to dissolve the ego and as a way to get in touch with something greater, with this Neptunian side. I will talk way more about Neptune, so no worries about all that. I will do a live very soon where we can dive into much more detail about Neptune, so do stay tuned for that. And of course, we cannot forget about the final eclipse of this eclipse season. It's a solar eclipse happening on March 29th, which means that both the sun and the moon will be in Aries in your 6th house. The solar eclipse means faded new beginnings. So you might find that out of nowhere, a responsibility gets dropped into your lap that might feel weird, maybe feels a bit misaligned, but in the end is leading you down the road which you are meant to go on. It could be that there is a new part of your routine that just comes out of nowhere, that gets dropped into your lap. Maybe like you get a random invite to an ice bath place that changes your routine and really changes your life as well. So do take any new things, any new opportunities around the 29th, do take them, because you never know where they might lead. All right, Sagittarius, let's talk about March 2025 for you. We do start the month with Venus going retrograde straight off the bat. It happens right away on March 1st. And the day after, on March 2nd, we do have the Sun squaring Jupiter. So definitely a bit of a tense start to the month of March. First of all, Venus goes retrograde in your 5th house. So you will probably be re-examining what you do for fun. What are the things that bring you pleasure and joy? And what is your relationship to them as well? Are you somebody that perhaps never allows themselves any fun or any time to enjoy life? Or are you maybe somebody that overindulges in it and never knows how to stop and overdoes it? Do keep in mind that the square between the Sun and Jupiter might make our egos a little bit extra egotistical. So be very mindful during this time. Not to take any actions yet. It's not the right time with Venus being retrograde. And be very careful, because the actions that you might take might come very much from the ego, and then later you might come to regret them. During the first part of March, the Sun is traveling through your 4th house. So you might feel a little bit more withdrawn, a little bit more focused on spending time alone, time at home, maybe time with your family. Of course, in the second part of March, it will move on to your 5th house, but we'll talk about that in a second. But especially because the Sun is quite active, basically with every movement it makes, it's going to touch one planet or another. So definitely this familial home theme is going to be front and center for you in at least the first half of March. On March 8th, specifically, the Sun is going to trine Mars. And if you remember, the first 2 months of 2025, Mars was retrograde. And I know I felt it. Probably you did too. There was definitely a struggle to express boundaries, to express frustrations and anger when Mars was retrograde. Now, though, that it's direct, and now especially on March 8th, that there's that supporting trine by the Sun, it might be a really good day to perhaps set some of those boundaries. If some lines were crossed back when Mars was retrograde and you still haven't set them straight, March 8th could be a good time for that. Again, the Sun is trining Mars from your 4th house. So it could be that these were familial boundaries that need to be set, for example. And then, of course, the Sun keeps on moving. And just a couple of days later, it makes another aspect, which is a conjunction with Saturn. This happens on March 12th. And this conjunction with Saturn could make us feel like we have a bit of a roadblock in the way. Again, the sun is in your 4th house, Sagittarius, so it could be that you feel a roadblock. You want to connect to your family, but you're just too busy with work, or your phone breaks and they live far away, so you cannot talk to them. You might find that there's also some roadblocks with your home. Perhaps you try to renovate some things and they're just not moving, or you run out of money for the renovation. And keep in mind, though, good news, the sun moves fairly quickly. So as soon as this conjunction comes in, just as soon it will go away, and that roadblock should be lifted. You should feel like you can continue on with your regulars, or with your scheduled programming, as they say. Then we reach about halfway through the month, March 14th, and we have our eclipse. We have the first eclipse of 2025. It's a lunar eclipse, which means it's a full moon. The sun is in Pisces, the moon is in Virgo. And for you, Sagittarius, these are angular houses. So you are one of the 4 signs of the zodiac that is probably going to see very outward manifestations of these eclipses. And by outward, I mean changes in jobs, changes in where you live, changes in relationships, very outwardly noticeable. For a lot of us, eclipses do bring a lot of changes, but for many of us, they're going to be quite internal. Things that maybe others cannot see. If they look at us, we still live at the same place, we still have the same job, but we might be an entirely different person. For you, though, that's not the case. For you, you are definitely going to see when these eclipses are done on this axis of Virgo and Pisces, you Sagittarius are going to look like a completely different person from the outside. So all of that being said, this lunar eclipse is about fated endings. Because we're on the axis of the 4th and 10th house, it could be fated endings that have to do with your career, or fated endings that have to do with your home. If you want to talk more one-on-one about eclipse season, you are curious, okay, I know what house it's in, but does it aspect any of my personal planets? Then you can schedule a reading. I do have 5 of them open. They are at a discounted price, so do make sure you snag one up down below before they're gone. All right, so the sun just keeps trudging along. And around March 20th, it actually reaches the last degrees of Pisces. It conjuncts Neptune there at the last degrees of Pisces, enters Aries. And believe it or not, Venus has retrograded so far back that it's now at the beginning of degrees of Aries. So therefore, the sun also conjuncts Venus. So this all happens from about March 20th to March 23rd. When the sun shifts into Aries, it's also shifting into your 5th house. So we do see here that some of your focus that was more inwardly drawn starts to feel a bit more comfortable to go outside, to step outside, to focus a lot more on doing fun things, playing, enjoying life, doing things that take care of your inner child. So that should feel really nice to step out of the cocoon that you were in the first part of March. And right as it enters your 5th house, it conjuncts Venus. And remember, with Venus being retrograde, you've been doing this deep reflection on what does it even mean for you to have fun? What is your relationship with fun and play? And I do think that when they conjunct, there might be a bit more clarity, a bit more understanding around these Venus retrograde themes. There might be, again, something happening that makes you realize, okay, so that is my relationship with fun. I didn't realize, but now I see it. And I do have to add the caveat that it's not going to be like everything makes sense. That usually doesn't happen until Venus is completely direct. Venus is still retrograde when the conjunction happens, so there will be many things that are still not clear. But I do think this conjunction is just one step closer in learning what the Venus retrograde is for us personally. And what I will also add is that the Sun conjunct Venus is sextiling Pluto, which to me shows that in order to understand and work with this Venus retrograde, we need to face our fears. For you, Pluto is in your third house, so you might need to face fears that you have around expressing yourself. Do you have fears that people are going to think you're too loud, that people are going to think you're too annoying, that people are going to think you're trying to be smarty pants? And is that fear of expressing yourself and how people are going to look at you, has it been holding you back from living life to the fullest? Hasn't been holding you back from having more fun and joy and pleasure in life? You have to look at that Pluto in order to start to reap some of the benefits of the Venus retrograde. Towards the end of March, something interesting happens, which is that basically Venus and Neptune switch spots. So Venus is going retrograde in Aries around March 27th. It ends up actually retrograding so far back that it enters Pisces. They're right at the final degrees. It conjuncts Neptune. And just a couple of days later, on March 30th, Neptune finally enters Aries. So they do a little switcheroo. Venus retrograding back into the fourth house is really interesting for you, Sagittarius. I really see it as this reflection you've been doing on your relationship to fun and pleasure and joy and play is now shifting, and you're perhaps looking at the way you were raised and how that has determined your current relationship to fun and play. You are starting to reflect back on, did I ever see my parents have fun? Did I get judged every time I was having fun? Did my parents make funny, smarky, or quirky remarks about, oh, well, all you do is have fun. Just wait until you're older and then you have responsibilities. And how has that impacted our current maybe inability to have fun, or perhaps our current taking out of proportion of having fun and overdoing it? And as I said, on March 30th, Neptune will enter Aries, which is your fifth house. So you are starting a 13-year period, 13-year period, where fun, pleasure, and play becomes your spiritual practice. Whatever that may mean for you. Dancing, painting. It doesn't even have to be really like creative. It could be puzzling. Losing yourself in an activity, losing the sense of time, losing a sense of your ego, that becomes your spiritual practice. That allows you to step away from the nuances. I can't think of the right word right now. The nuisance of everyday life, and keep in mind what really matters, why we're all here. Keep in mind that we're just little humans on a rock floating in space. And of course, we cannot forget to talk about the final eclipse of eclipse season. There will be more eclipses, but they're coming later in September. On March 29th, we have a solar eclipse. It's the sun and the moon are in the sign of Aries, which means it's a new moon. This is your fifth house. Surprise! That your fourth and fifth house are very much highlighted during this month, Sagittarius. And I love it. I love this solar eclipse because the sun and the moon are basically almost at the exact same degrees Venus was in at the beginning of March when it went retrograde. So definitely the solar eclipse is going to be part of that bigger Venus retrograde story. It's going to bring up the same themes. And for you, it will be faded new beginnings when it comes to play and fun and being in a state of flow and creativity. So whatever opportunity comes your way, if you get invited for a weird class where you all act like monkeys, don't judge, just go. Because it might change your life even if you don't know it yet. All right, Capricorn, March is going to be an impactful period for you because it does impact your fourth house, which is an angular house, a sensitive house. Specifically, you do have Venus going retrograde in your fourth house. This happens right away. It happens on March 1st. And the next day on March 2nd, we also have the Sun squaring Jupiter. So both of these, Venus going retrograde, Sun square Jupiter, are a bit of an uncomfortable way to start the month. With Venus going retrograde in your fourth house, you might start reflecting on your familial relationships, your relationship with your home, and whether the way you're acting, whether the way your home looks, whether the way your relationships are with your family are in line with your values, or if something needs to change there. And as I said, the next day on March 2nd, we have that square with Sun and Jupiter, which can mean that our egos can get a little bit strong. So be very mindful, because we are talking about the fourth house, your relationship with your family. Be mindful that you don't overreact, especially when with your family. You don't act from a place of ego, feeling or saying something that you might regret later. So besides your fourth house, you also have your third house, Capricorn, that's going to be quite front and center during March. This is because you have a lot of planets there, but mostly it's because the Sun is there, and at least for the first half of March, and it's moving the same speed that it always moves. But what's special about this time is that almost every movement it makes, every 2, 3, 4 degrees, every 2, 3, 4 steps it takes, it comes in aspect with the planet, which means that we're probably going to feel quite some ups and downs, some peaks and valleys as the Sun moves and highlights different planets. On March 8th, the Sun will trine Mars. And if you remember the first 2 months of 2025, Mars was retrograde. So probably, if you were anything like me, you struggle to express frustrations, anger, you struggle to set boundaries. Maybe you held them back a lot and then you could no longer hold them, and then you just burst out loud with them. And I love March 8th because it almost is like the day that we get a permission from the universe to say, okay, now you can set the boundary. Now say something, now do something. And I do recommend that on March 8th, Capricorn, especially if there is still something from the Mars retrograde that you feel like it hasn't been sorted out. On March 8th, it's going to be supported nicely by the Sun. So it's a good time to set your boundaries. Then the Sun keeps on moving. It ends up going further into Pisces. And as it does that, it also conjuncts Saturn. The conjunction with Saturn will feel like there's a roadblock to our communication. We might feel like we struggle to express ourselves. People maybe cannot understand us, or they misinterpret us, or we need to repeat ourselves a couple of times. If you're somebody that writes for a living or teaches or speaks for a living, you might find that is maybe the opportunities are drying up, or you really have to work super hard to remember what you were going to say, or you need to rewrite everything that you wrote. Do keep in mind that the Sun moves quite fast. So honestly, this roadblock, I don't think it's going to be a super long one, a super permanent one. It will probably be a roadblock that we might feel for a day or two, but then eventually things should start flowing again. And then, of course, we reach March 14th, which is our first eclipse. The first eclipse of 2025, the first eclipse of eclipse season. That's definitely one to remember, let's just say. On March 14th, we have a total lunar eclipse. It's happening in Pisces. technically it's happening in Virgo. The sun is in Pisces, the moon is in Virgo, which means that this is a full moon. This lunar eclipse means that there's a faded ending. A faded ending when it comes to your beliefs and values, Capricorn. The moon is in your 9th house, so therefore you might find that something happens that makes you realize, wow, that political party I was aligned with, this is no longer in line. That belief I had on abortion, on immigration, on the role family plays in my life was wrong, and something needs to change. It might feel weird to go through endings. It might feel like we don't want to let go. We like things the way they are right now. But do trust that if you accept this ending and you allow yourself to exist without this thing or belief that's being taken away, that it is for your good. All of that being said, if you do want to sit one-on-one, take a look at your personal chart, not only what houses are your eclipses in, but are they touching any planets for you? You can book a personal reading. I have 5 spots open and they are at a discounted price. So I do highly recommend grabbing one. I've left the link for you down below in the comments. Then we get about halfway through the month from the 20th until the 23rd. When we have the sun traveling so far in Pisces that it's at the final degrees. Before it steps into Aries, it conjuncts Neptune. And as soon as it steps into Aries, it conjuncts Venus. I do think the conjunction with Neptune in your 3rd house around the 20th will actually be a really nice time if you are writing or speaking. You might feel like the words are just flowing out of nowhere. You're really inspired with what you're saying. So I do hope that you take advantage of that. Once the sun moves out of your 3rd house and into your 4th house, you might also find that your attention shifts more to your family, more to your home. There was a bit of that attention there already with Venus going retrograde, but I do think for the first part you were also more focused on communication and your local environment. And for this middle part of March, Venus is still in your 4th house, the sun enters your 4th house. There will be a very strong familial focus and home focus. You might feel a lot more introverted, a lot more like you want to spend time on your own instead of being out into the world. And I do gotta say that when the sun enters Aries and it conjuncts Venus, you might see some themes of this Venusian retrograde coming up again. There might be other things that happen that force you again to reflect on your relationship with your family, your home, the role it plays in your life. And what I love about this conjunction is that it's also sextiling Pluto. Pluto is in your 2nd house. And what it shows to me is that if we are to grasp this Venus retrograde, if we are to work with it and to find out what it's trying to teach us, we do need to address our fears. We are talking about Pluto after all. We need to address the fears that we have around our own self-worth. Are we afraid that we're not worthy enough? Are we afraid that we're not worth of love? Are we afraid that we're not able to look after ourselves and provide for ourselves? And how is that fear perhaps holding us back from cultivating a home that's aligned with us, cultivating a better relationship with our family? Definitely do take a look at that fear with Pluto in your 2nd house. And just like that, we're towards the end of March. And what happens at the end of March is quite interesting. We basically have Venus and Neptune switch spots. Venus is leaving Aries. It enters Pisces. That happens around March 27th. And on March 30th, a couple of days later, Neptune leaves Pisces and enters Aries. So they basically switch signs with each other. Venus retrograding from Aries into Pisces might shift your Venusian themes from how am I showing up with my family? What is my relationship to my home? And it's not completely going to shift, like that will still be the underlying core theme, but it might shift so that it also includes themes of communication. So now you're not just thinking, what is my relationship to my family, but you're also thinking more specifically, how do I communicate with my family and how do they communicate with me? Can I change maybe something about the method of communication? Maybe when we're on the phone, we always get too angry. Maybe I need to start doing emails or letters or text messages. So there's definitely a little extra theme that gets added on top about communication, reflecting on that, the way we express ourselves. And of course, with Neptune entering Aries or your fourth house, this is major. This is the start of a 13-year period. I am going to do a YouTube live very soon talking all about it, so stay tuned for that. But Neptune in your fourth house is all about working with your emotional world, working with your emotions, and allowing that deeper understanding of what's going on inside you to be your spiritual work, to be the thing that helps you always in the back of your mind with keeping perspective, beyond just, oh, I need to go to work and I need to take care of myself and I need to pay bills, and keep focused that we're just little humans on a rock moving through space. And then, of course, we cannot forget to talk about the last eclipse of this eclipse season. There will be more eclipses coming later in September, but for this eclipse season, this will be the last one. It happens on March 29th, and it's a solar eclipse, which means it's a new moon. The sun and the moon will be in Aries in your fourth house. Surprise. I told you the third and the fourth house were very prominent for you, Capricorn. A solar eclipse in your fourth house means a fated new beginning. A new beginning with your family, a new beginning with your home. Maybe you literally move into a new place. Or maybe your familial relationship is rejuvenated in some way. So it can definitely manifest very beautifully as well. I do hope that whatever opportunity comes your way, something new comes your way around March 29th, do take it, because you never know where that opportunity will lead you in the future. All right, Aquarius, let's have a chat about March 2025 and what you can expect. We do start off with Venus going retrograde on March 1st, and then on March 2nd, we have the Sun squaring Jupiter. For you, Aquarius, Venus goes retrograde in your third house. It's the third house of communication. So with Venus going retrograde, you're probably going to reflect on your communication. How you communicate. Is the way you communicate actually in line with the type of person you are and the things you value? You might say you're a kind person, but do you actually always speak with frustration, or always try to speak and exert your dominance when you speak? During this time, the square with the Sun and Jupiter might make us a little bit egotistical, a little bit more than usual. And I mean, don't be afraid. We all have that part of us, and it's definitely necessary. But with Venus going retrograde at the same time, especially in your house of communication, be very careful that the confusion, maybe things feeling a bit uncomfortable, don't make you express yourself in a very egotistical way, that you don't say things that you later think, oof, okay, that was definitely coming out of my ego. So the third house is very important for you this month, Aquarius, but so is the second house. This is because, the eclipses are happening in your second house, but also at the beginning part of March, we have the Sun traveling through your second house. And it's especially an important transit because it seems almost every 3-4 steps it takes, it aspects a planet. So I think its transit through your second house is almost like extra emphasized during March. So we talked about the sun is squaring Jupiter on the 2nd. Then on the 8th, the sun will trine Mars. Mars was retrograde at the beginning of 2025. We might have had some boundaries that were crossed, some frustrations that we couldn't express, some anger that we kept inside. And if there are still some of those themes that maybe you didn't iron out, you didn't set the boundaries, March 8th could be a wonderful time to do that. Mars is moving direct. It's supported but with that trine with the sun. So definitely, if you do need to express some boundaries again, maybe financial boundaries, because we are talking about the sun in the second house, then definitely March 8th is a good time to do that. The sun keeps moving through your second house, and then on the 12th, a couple of days after the 8th, it conjuncts Saturn. The conjunction with Saturn can feel like there's a bit of a roadblock in our way. We're talking about the financial house, so maybe literally you feel short on money, a big bill comes out of your account, and you feel like you face the reality of your financial situation. But in general, the second house is also about our self-confidence, our self-esteem. So it could also be any roadblock that feels like we cannot love ourselves, we cannot accept ourselves, we cannot show up for ourselves in the way that we usually can. One piece of good news, I should say, is the sun moves quite fast. So probably the roadblock is not going to be anything major, and most likely it will get resolved quite quickly. And then we get to the middle of the month, March 14th to be exact, where we do have our first eclipse. It's the first eclipse of 2025. It's also the first eclipse of this eclipse season. And it's a lunar eclipse, which means it's a full moon. The sun is in the sign of Pisces, and the moon is in the sign of Virgo. With the lunar eclipse, we are looking at fated endings. For you, this fated ending is happening in your 8th house. It could be a fated ending with your relationship to intimacy and vulnerability. It doesn't have to mean that a literal relationship ends, but maybe before you were quite reluctant in being vulnerable with somebody. You could find that ends around this eclipse season. You could find that before you were a bit reserved when it came to being intimate with someone. You could find that comes to an end during this eclipse season. The 8th house also represents other people's money or taxes, inheritances. So if there was anything happening with your taxes or with inheritances, you might find that ends around this eclipse as well. If you are curious about what does this mean specifically for you, not only looking at the houses that are impacted, but maybe also personal or aspects to personal planets, I want to let you know that I do have my books open. I have 5 spots available for eclipse readings. So we can definitely sit down. We have half an hour dedicated to you. These are available at a discounted price. So make sure you check out the link down below in the comments to pick your spot. Then halfway through the month, from about March 20th to the 23rd, we do have the sun reaching the final degrees of Pisces, conjuncting Neptune. Then it ends up entering Aries, and when it enters Aries, it conjuncts Venus. With the sun conjunct Neptune in your second house, be very careful with how you spend your money. Neptune can make us not see reality anymore and make make some weird decisions because we think things look better than they do. So just be mindful of what you do with your money during this time. It might look like your money situation is better than it actually is. But once the sun leaves your second house and enters your third house, you might find that a lot of your focus also shifts away from your financial situation, from your you working on loving yourself, working on your self-confidence, and it will probably shift more to, okay, now that my finances are better, now that I have worked on loving myself, how can I express myself to reflect that? How can I talk in a way that shows this newfound confidence, newfound love for myself? And I do think, especially because the sun is going to conjunct Venus there in your third house, you might find that it will bring up again these Venusian or Venus retrograde themes, I should say. And you might find that things that there's events happening that continue this Venus retrograde story. And perhaps you don't have all the clarity yet, but it might feel like the pieces are slowly coming together. Slowly, you've gotten a couple of these themes with the Venus retrograde that maybe you're starting to add things up and starting to see a bigger picture. And what I love about this conjunction between the Sun and Venus is that it sextiles Pluto. Pluto is in your first house, and this sextile shows us that in order to understand and work with this Venus retrograde, you need to face your fears when it comes to your leadership, when it comes to showing up as unapologetically yourself and being okay with standing out from the crowd and perhaps leading people to a different path, a different way of life, a different way of being, and doing that just by being yourself and showing them how you do things. If you have fears around that, if you're afraid that people will judge you, if you're afraid to stand out from the crowd, if you're afraid because you don't think you have what it takes to be a leader, definitely take a look at those, because it's going to help with reaping those Venus retrograde lessons, help with reaping the understandings that Venus retrograde is trying to teach us. Towards the end of March, there is something interesting that happens between Venus and Neptune. They basically switch signs. Venus retrogrades back into Pisces on the 27th, and Neptune moves forwards into Aries on March 30th. Neptune moving into Aries on the 30th starts a 13-year chapter for you, Aquarius. And this chapter is all about keeping your senses open. Your taste buds, your ears, your eyes, your nose open to any synchronicities that are happening. With Neptune in the third house of communication, we could see that we become a lot more open to seeing things that are unseeable to others, or hearing things that are unheard by others. And I don't want to scare anybody or say everybody that's Aquarius is going to go psychic in the next 13 years. But I do think that with Neptune in the third house, the next 13 years is about remaining open, remaining curious, and letting that be the thing that allows us to get in contact with something spiritual and something greater. And of course, we cannot end until we talk about the final eclipse for this eclipse season. There are more eclipses happening later in the year, of course, in September, but for this eclipse season, this is the final one. It happens on March 29th. It's a solar eclipse, which means it's a new moon, and the sun and the moon are in Aries in your third house. A solar eclipse is a new beginning in your third house. Literally, that eclipse is happening almost at the exact same degrees that Venus went retrograde at the beginning of the month. So this is an eclipse definitely connected with the Venus retrograde. But it's a new beginning when it comes to your communication. maybe you have an opportunity come your way to write or speak or teach. Definitely take that opportunity. You never know where it may lead you. Or in general, it might be starting a new chapter with the way you communicate, becoming more aligned and communicating in a way that's more aligned with who you really are. All right, Pisces, now let's talk about your March 2025 horoscope. We do start off March a little bit rocky. We start off right away on March 1st with Venus going retrograde. And then on March 2nd, we have a square between the Sun and Jupiter. So definitely a little bit uncomfortable. Venus goes retrograde in your second house. Venus going retrograde there might make you reflect on your finances and whether you've been spending money in a way that aligns with your values. Maybe you value your friendships, but you never spend money on getting your friends gifts or spending time with them, spending to go out for dinner with them. Maybe you don't value money, but you realize that you spend a lot of your time making sure that you accumulate money, maybe more than to the extent that's needed for your bills. So that's definitely going to be focus for you with this Venus retrograde. And the second house is also about our self-confidence and our self-love for ourselves. And especially with Venus there, I do think that there will be a reflection for you, Pisces, on what does it mean to you to love yourself? Does that mean giving yourself the chocolate or the ice cream when you want it and not restricting? Does it mean making sure you take care of yourself by not scrolling all night on Instagram and instead making sure to get to bed on time, start sleeping on time? So these are definitely two major themes for you. As I said already, on March 2nd, we do have the square between the Sun and Jupiter. That could inflate our egos. It could make us act out of our ego. So be very mindful. Maybe you're feeling a bit stressed about your finances and you act out of your ego. You say something to your partner and they, it ends up impacting the relationship negatively. So just be very mindful of your ego at the beginning of March. So definitely this second house is front and center in March, but so is your first house, Pisces, which also means that March is probably going to be quite pivotal for you. You have your eclipses in your first house as well. Right now you have the Sun moving through your first house as well. Venus later in March is going to retrograde back into your first house. So Pisces, I really do hope that you take care of yourself in the month ahead. Lean upon the resources that you have to help support you. And just remember, if it's difficult, everything eventually comes to an end. So before you know it, this season will pass and then it will be time for another zodiac sign to have it difficult. But all of that being said, so the Sun is in your first house during the first part of March. And I do feel like its travel through your first house will be a lot more emphasized than the other times when it travels through other houses. And this is because as it travels through Pisces, the Sun, like literally every 3-4 degrees, makes an aspect to something. We already talked about it squaring Jupiter. Already on March 8th, it trines Mars. And then later we keep having more and more and more aspects with the Sun. So on March 8th, we do have the Sun trining Mars. Mars was retrograde for the beginning of 2025. If you were anything like me, then you probably may have struggled expressing your anger, expressing your frustration. Maybe certain boundaries were crossed. And if you feel like you didn't iron those open ends out yet, if you feel like, okay, I should really go back and set those boundaries, March 8th is a really good time to do that. The Mars has that supporting trine from the sun, so it's definitely going to support us in sort of standing up for ourselves, but not in a way that is overpowering or done out of ego, but in a way that supports us and still protects our relationships, for example. Then the sun keeps moving along your first house. A couple of days later, on the 12th, it makes another aspect. This time it's a conjunction with Saturn. The conjunction with Saturn will feel like there's a roadblock in your way. And because it's in your first house, it might feel like it's quite a big roadblock that prevents you in some way from expressing yourself and being who you are. It might prevent you from taking a leadership position, standing out from the crowd. You might feel like this roadblock forces you back in with the crowd, forces you to be like everybody else. And one good point about this aspect is that the sun moves quite fast. So before we know it, this roadblock should move out of the way. Then about halfway through the month, or specifically March 14th, we have the first eclipse. It is a lunar eclipse. It is a lunar eclipse in Virgo, which means the sun is in Pisces and the moon is in Virgo. And yes, Pisces, these are your first and seventh houses, so it's definitely going to be a pivotal eclipse for you. And what I've been telling the other zodiac signs that have the eclipse in angular houses, and this is true for you as well, Pisces, you are most likely to see effects of this eclipse in a very outward way. All of us are always going through changes. Eclipses are always impacting us. Sometimes they impact us in a way where everything looks the same. We're in the same relationships, same apartment, same job, but the person we are on the inside is entirely different. But that's not you, because these eclipses are happening in the angular houses. Instead, these eclipses will do the opposite. You won't be in the same house. You won't be in the same apartment. Maybe you won't be in the same relationship. That's only for you to find out. So the changes are a lot more on the outward manner. If somebody looks at you, they will be like, wow, you've really changed, because they really see specific things that look different. This lunar eclipse, again, is on your axis of the first and seventh house. So we are perhaps considering your relationship. We are thinking about what type of partner you are, whether the relationship is really on equal ground, how you can balance being an individual while also being in a relationship. So just some things that might be top of mind during the eclipse. And I am giving eclipse readings. My books are open. I do only have 5 spots available, so not too many, but they are highly discounted from my regular price. So if you do want to sit down, really look at your chart and what aspects does it make to certain planets, then make sure you click on the link down below in the comments. Then we get to a period of about 3 days from the 20th to the 23rd, where we have the sun reaching the final degrees of Pisces. It conjuncts Neptune right there at those 29 degrees of Pisces, enters Aries, and believe it or not, Venus is actually retrograded so far back, it's now at those beginning degrees of Aries. So when the sun enters Aries, it also conjuncts Venus. So quite a few things happening in a 3-day period, definitely. So with the sun moving into Aries, or your second house, you might find that your focus shifts a little bit away from this sort of, how can I be a leader? How can I stand apart from the crowd? And shifts a bit more towards, okay, how can I take care of myself and how can I love myself in my own unique way? That was already the focus with Venus going retrograde, but now it might especially sort of double down once the sun enters in your second house as well. When the Sun conjuncts Venus, I do think some more themes of that Venus retrograde will come back up, maybe some events again that sort of trigger the same Venus retrograde themes. And what I love about this conjunction, though, there's a little interesting detail, and it's that it's sextiling Pluto. Pluto is in your 12th house, and this sextile shows me that in order for us to really grasp the Venus retrograde, to learn from it, to change our lives from it, we need to face our fears. And for you Pisces, that might be the fear that you have of letting go, the fear that you have of letting go of control, letting go of material things, maybe the fear that you have of getting in touch with something greater than just being a human, eating, sleeping, going to work. If you face those fears, instead of running away from them, you might find that you start to get better clarity with these Venusian themes of loving yourself, of being there for yourself, providing for yourself. Then towards the end of the month, we're talking 27th to the 30th, we see something interesting happen, which is that Venus and Neptune basically switch signs. Neptune's going direct, so on the 30th, it will enter Aries. But before it does that, Venus, who's going retrograde, actually ends up entering Pisces. So they basically switch zodiac signs. With Venus entering Pisces, you might find that the Venus retrograde gets more intense, more central, more present. If you have felt that up until the 27th, that maybe the Venus retrograde was a bit more easygoing, once it enters your first house, it might feel a lot more prominent. You might find that you find it difficult to be self-confident, especially in that first house moving retrograde. You might find that you're especially overly analytical of the way you look, the way you dress, the things you say, the way you move and talk, and just everything feels so off and not like it's really you. And I do advise you to just trust the process. It's not permanent, it's just for a little bit. And if you do have practices like journaling or meditation, do try to see, maybe what are the themes coming up? Is there a pattern? Just start to see if there is a way that you can use the struggle towards when Venus goes retrograde or when Venus goes direct towards changing something so that it's feeling more aligned and so that you're able to love yourself even more. And then, of course, on the 30th, when Neptune enters Aries or your second house, it's actually starting a 13-year period. 13 years of Neptune traveling through your second house. So you're definitely starting an important period where you are learning to invest, literally financially, invest in your spirituality, in taking care of your soul, where you are learning to perhaps have your relationship to material things aid your spiritual life, your spiritual practice. Maybe there is specific beads, like prayer beads, or specific cloth that, I don't know, this sounds crazy, but I think some people will understand what I mean, that when you touch, it's almost like you're transported to something greater. This combination with finances and materiality and spirituality, for the next 13 years, you might find that they really start to come together. And I will do a live all about Neptune and Aries as well, so make sure you stick around. We'll talk about it way more there. And of course, we cannot forget to talk about the final eclipse of this eclipse season. It's the second eclipse of 2025. It's definitely not the last. There's going to be more eclipses in September. It occurs on March 29th, and it is a solar eclipse. This means that both the sun and the moon will be in your second house, in Aries, of course. And what I love about the solar eclipse is that the sun and the moon are almost at the exact same degrees that Venus was in when it went retrograde at the beginning of March. Like, chills. I think this shows us that this solar eclipse is definitely related to that Venus retrograde. It's definitely going to bring up the same themes. The solar eclipse is about fate and new beginnings. So if you have a new opportunity coming your way with your finances, a new opportunity for self-love, self-care, a new opportunity where you get to take care of yourself financially, mentally, spiritually, take it. Usually what comes our way during an eclipse is there to help improve our life and set us down the right path, or set us even further down the right path if we're already on it. So that is it. So those are all the 12 horoscopes for March. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you enjoyed this format where all of them are together. Let me know down in the comments if you like it, or if you prefer maybe the individual videos. I honestly don't think I mind either way. Just trying something new. I hope you enjoy March. I hope you enjoy the focus on your Pisces and Aries houses. There's a lot happening there. Just remember, it's not forever. Everything is temporary. So even if it is a more of a difficult period for you, I hope you do remember that it will pass. As I shared already, my books are open for eclipse readings. The link is down below. So if you want some extra support, make sure you grab one. There are only 5 spots available. So if you wait too long, they might all get taken and then you miss your chance. Thanks, everybody. Happy March. And I hope to see you again soon.